Hello, Midnight Wanderers, and welcome to Ashern Horror. This is where ancient whispers rise beneath a crimson sky, carrying you softly into the world of dreams and shadows. Before tonight's haunting story begins, tell me, what corner of the world are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. And if the silence of the night calls to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you'll never miss the moon's next dark secret. One night, when I was still young enough to believe that home was the safest place in the world, I went upstairs to take a shower. It was an ordinary evening, the kind you never expect to remember years later. Nothing felt unusual when I closed the bathroom door behind me. My mother was downstairs in the living room watching television. My father and my sister were out in the garage working on the car. Everyone was home, and because of that, I felt completely safe. The bathroom was warm and beginning to fill with steam. I turned on the water, waited for it to heat up, and stepped into the shower. Within a few minutes, the sound of the running water had covered almost everything else in the house. I could still hear the television downstairs now and then, especially when the volume became louder during a commercial or an action scene, but most sounds were distant and unclear. I was standing under the water when I thought I heard someone scream. It sounded like it came from downstairs. I froze for a moment and lifted my head, trying to listen over the shower. The water continued striking the bottom of the tub, filling the bathroom with a steady rushing sound. I could not hear anything clearly after that. There may have been voices, but they sounded too far away to understand. I told myself it was only the television. My mother often watched shows with loud arguments, dramatic music, or sudden shouting. The scream could easily have come from whatever she was watching. There was no reason to think something was wrong. My father and sister were in the garage. My mother was in the living room. I was upstairs. Everyone was where they were supposed to be. I tried to relax and continued washing. Then someone knocked on the bathroom door. It was not a soft knock. It was loud enough to be heard clearly over the running water. I assumed it was my sister. She had a habit of bothering me when I wanted to be left alone. She enjoyed jokes and small pranks, especially when she knew I could not easily chase her away. "Yeah?" I called. There was no answer. Instead, the person on the other side of the door made a strange sound with their mouth. It was like a childish raspberry, the kind someone makes by pressing their lips together and blowing. I became annoyed. "Go away," I shouted. "I'm trying to shower." I expected to hear my sister laugh or run away. I waited for the sound of her footsteps moving down the hall. Nothing happened. The hallway outside remained silent. That was when I began to feel that something was wrong. My sister was a prankster, but the sound had not seemed like her. It was too low and too rough. More importantly, she normally would have laughed after bothering me. She would have said something sarcastic or knocked again. She would not have stood silently outside the bathroom door. I stopped moving and listened. The water ran over my shoulders, but I hardly noticed it anymore. My heart had started beating faster. I stared at the shower curtain as though I might somehow see through it and understand what was happening outside. I wanted to call my mother, but I did not want to sound frightened if it really was only my sister. At that age, being embarrassed sometimes felt almost as bad as being afraid. I also did not know whether my voice would carry downstairs through the closed bathroom door and the sound of the shower. This happened before everyone carried cell phones. There was no phone sitting on the bathroom counter. There was no way to send a message or quietly call the police. The house phone was downstairs, far beyond the locked door. For the first time, I looked around the bathroom and realized how helpless I was. I had recently watched Home Alone, and part of my mind began searching for something I could use to defend myself. In the movie, the child had tools, traps, ropes, paint cans, and plenty of time to prepare. I had shampoo, soap, towels, a hairbrush, and a plastic shower curtain. There was nothing that felt useful. I thought about pulling the shower rod down and using it as a weapon, but I was not sure I could remove it quickly. I considered throwing shampoo into someone's eyes, but that seemed foolish even while I was thinking about it. Whoever was outside could have been much larger than me. I felt small, exposed, and completely powerless. The bathroom door was locked, but suddenly the lock did not seem strong. It was only a simple indoor lock, not something designed to keep out a determined person. If someone wanted to enter badly enough, they probably could. I tried to create a plan. I decided I would finish the shower as quickly as possible. Then I would dry myself, get dressed, and hide inside the bathroom cabinet beneath the sink. I was small enough to fit inside, and the cabinets were mostly empty. It was not a good plan, but it was the only one I had. I imagined someone opening the bathroom door and finding the room empty. Maybe they would think I had escaped. Maybe they would leave without checking the cabinet. The idea gave me just enough comfort to keep moving. I hurried to rinse the soap from my hair and body. Every few seconds, I stopped and listened. I heard faint movement outside, but I could not tell whether it was coming from the hallway, downstairs, or inside my own imagination. I wondered whether I should shut off the water. If I turned it off, I might hear what was happening more clearly. But whoever was outside would also know that I had stopped showering. As long as the water kept running, maybe they would think I was unaware of them. I do not remember what I finally chose. Some parts of that night remain painfully clear, while other moments feel broken and distant. Fear has a strange way of changing memory. I remember the steam on the mirror. I remember the wet tile beneath my feet. I remember staring at the curtain and trying not to breathe too loudly. Then the bathroom door was kicked open. The sound was violent and sudden. The door slammed inward with a cracking noise that seemed to shake the entire room. I was still standing naked in the shower. I do not remember whether the water was running at that exact moment. I think it was, but I cannot be certain. What I remember clearly is that the shower curtain was closed, separating me from whoever had entered. For one terrible second, I could see only the shadowy movement of people through the thin curtain. I gave a quiet gasp. I did not scream. Even now, I do not know why. Maybe I had already spent the previous minutes expecting the door to be broken down. The fear had built so slowly that when it finally happened, my body simply froze. I had imagined someone entering so many times that the real moment almost felt like something I had already experienced. I heard several men shouting. Their voices were loud, sharp, and urgent. I could not understand everything they were saying. There seemed to be more than one person inside or near the bathroom. Heavy footsteps moved across the floor. I reached toward the side of the tub, trying to grab a towel. Before I could pull it around myself, the footsteps suddenly moved away. The men ran out of the bathroom. Then I heard them rushing through the hallway and down the stairs. Doors slammed. Someone shouted again. A few seconds later, I heard a vehicle start outside. The engine roared, and the car drove away. The entire thing happened so quickly that I stood frozen behind the curtain, unable to understand why they had left. I remained there for several seconds, afraid that someone might still be inside the house. My hand was wrapped around the towel, but I had not yet covered myself. My legs felt weak. Then I heard my family moving and speaking downstairs. Their voices sounded frightened, but familiar. I pulled the towel around myself and carefully stepped out of the shower. The bathroom door was hanging open, damaged from the force of the kick. The hallway beyond it looked empty. I got dressed as quickly as I could and went downstairs. That was when I learned what had really happened. It had not been the television that I heard. 3 men had entered our home. While my father and sister were working on the car, The garage door had been left open. That was normal when someone was repairing a vehicle. The men approached the garage and asked if they could borrow the phone. At first, the request did not seem dangerous. This was before cell phones became common, so strangers sometimes asked to use a house phone in an emergency. My father became suspicious, though, and tried to signal to my sister that she should go inside and close the door. The men appeared to be East Asian, and my father made the mistake of assuming they might understand Mandarin. He tried speaking in Mandarin so he could quietly warn my sister without the strangers knowing what he was saying. They either understood him or quickly realized what he was trying to do. My sister handed them the cordless phone. One of the men opened the phone line and dropped the handset without ending the call. By leaving the phone connected, they tied up the line. No one inside the house would be able to use another phone to call the police. It was a simple trick, but it worked. Then the men pulled the garage door shut. Once the door was closed and they were hidden from the street, one of them pulled out a gun. They forced my father and sister into the house. My mother was still in the living room when they came inside. The yelling I had heard from upstairs was not coming from the television. It was my family being threatened. The men gathered everyone downstairs and demanded money. They searched the house while holding my family at gunpoint. Meanwhile, I was upstairs in the shower, unaware of what was really happening. At some point, one of the robbers heard me, or remembered hearing my voice. They came upstairs and knocked on the bathroom door. When I answered, the person made that strange raspberry sound. I still do not know why. Maybe he was mocking me. Maybe he was testing whether someone was really inside. Maybe he thought it was funny that I had no idea what was happening. When I shouted at him to go away, he knew the bathroom was occupied. The robbers continued searching the house, but eventually they returned to the bathroom. The locked door must have made them nervous. They may have thought I was hiding something, using another phone, or trying to escape through a window. Then they kicked it open. They were armed. I was naked, trapped, and completely helpless behind a thin curtain. Yet for some reason, they did not pull the curtain aside. They did not touch me. They did not even stay long enough to see who was inside. They ran. The robbers escaped with several $100s. They did not fire the gun, and none of us were physically injured. Considering what could have happened, we were unbelievably lucky. The police came and searched the area, but the men were never found. For a long time, I could not understand why they had suddenly panicked after breaking down the bathroom door. They had already taken control of the house. They had a gun. My parents and sister were downstairs, unable to stop them. I was only a child hiding in a shower. There was no logical reason for them to be afraid of me. I asked my father about it later. He thought about what had happened and offered an explanation that still makes sense to me. The shower curtain had been closed when they entered. They could not see anyone inside. Earlier, they had heard me answer from behind the locked door. They knew someone had been in the bathroom. But when they kicked the door open, I did not scream. I did not shout. I did not cry for help. To them, the bathroom may have seemed empty. They may have believed that I had somehow escaped. Perhaps they thought there was a window in the bathroom. Maybe they imagined that I had climbed out, reached a neighbor's house, and called the police. Maybe they thought officers were already on their way. From their point of view, it must have been confusing. A person had answered them only minutes earlier, yet after they broke the door down, there was no visible reaction from behind the curtain. My silence may have frightened them more than a scream would have. If I had screamed, they would have known exactly where I was. They might have pulled the curtain open. They might have dragged me downstairs with the rest of my family. Instead, because I froze, they thought I was gone. They ran before checking. It is strange to think that doing nothing may have saved me. At the time, I felt ashamed that I had not screamed. I thought being brave meant fighting back, shouting loudly, or finding some clever way to defeat the intruders. Movies had taught me that a person in danger was supposed to act quickly and confidently. But real fear does not always work that way. Sometimes your body freezes before your mind can decide what to do. Sometimes you cannot move, speak, or even breathe normally. For years, I wondered whether I had failed to react properly. Now I understand that there may not have been a proper reaction. I was a child, trapped in a bathroom with 3 armed men inside the house. I had no phone, no weapon, and no way to escape. Silence was not part of my plan. It was simply what fear did to me, and somehow it worked. After the robbery, the house never felt completely safe again. Before that night, I had believed locked doors were enough. I believed danger stayed outside unless someone invited it in. I believed that when my parents were home, nothing truly bad could happen. The robbers changed that. For weeks, every small sound made me nervous. A knock on the door made my stomach tighten. If someone walked past the bathroom while I was showering, I stopped the water and listened. I hated closing the shower curtain because I could not see the room beyond it. At the same time, I hated leaving it open because I felt too exposed. Sometimes I imagined shadows moving on the other side, even when no one was there. The broken bathroom door was eventually repaired, but I could still remember exactly how it had looked hanging open after the kick. A new lock did not erase the sound of wood cracking. My family also became more careful. The garage door was never left open without someone watching it. We became suspicious of strangers asking to use the phone. We checked the doors more often and paid attention to cars parked nearby. Those habits stayed with us long after the stolen money stopped mattering. The money was never the worst part. The worst part was knowing how easily 3 strangers had entered our lives and taken control of the house. They had used a simple request for help. They had blocked the phone line with one small action. Within minutes, my family was being held at gunpoint while I stood upstairs thinking the screams were coming from the television. That detail still troubles me. I heard something terrible happening and convinced myself it was normal. Of course, I was not wrong to think that. Loud televisions were common. My family was home. There had been no warning. Still, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had understood sooner. There was probably nothing I could have done. Even if I had known, I had no phone in the bathroom and no safe way out. Calling downstairs might only have revealed that another person was in the house. Trying to leave the bathroom could have placed me directly in front of the armed men. The truth is that hiding in the shower was probably the safest place I could have been, even though it did not feel safe at all. I also think about the strange sound the robber made through the door. That raspberry was childish and almost playful, which made it more frightening. A person with a gun was standing outside the bathroom, but instead of speaking normally, he made a mocking noise like a child. For a few seconds, he allowed me to believe it might be my sister. That small act showed how calm he felt inside our home. He believed he had complete control. He knew my family was downstairs. He knew the phone line was blocked. He knew I was trapped behind a locked bathroom door. Then, only minutes later, he and the other men were running for their lives because they thought I had disappeared. They never knew I was standing only a few feet away behind the curtain, too frightened to make a sound. Years have passed, but I still remember that moment more clearly than almost anything else from my childhood. I remember the warmth of the water and the cold fear moving through my body. I remember staring at the shower curtain while the door broke open. I remember the shouting, the footsteps, and the sudden silence after they fled. Most of all, I remember how close the robbers came. If one of them had reached forward and pulled the curtain aside, the story could have ended very differently. But he did not. They believed I had escaped. They thought I was getting help, and because I was too terrified to scream, they ran away without ever realizing how helpless I truly was. A few years ago, I had an experience that completely changed the way I felt about being alone in my own home. Before that night, I had always believed that once I locked the front door, I was safe. My apartment was supposed to be the one place where I could relax without worrying about strangers or danger. After what happened, that feeling never fully returned. At the time, I lived alone in a small apartment. It was not in a particularly dangerous neighborhood, and I had never had any serious problems there before. The building was usually quiet at night. Sometimes I could hear a neighbor moving furniture, someone walking in the hallway, or a television playing through the walls, but those sounds were normal. I had become used to them. My bedroom was located down a short hallway from the living room and kitchen. The bathroom was nearby, and the front door was on the other side of the apartment. When I went to sleep, I usually left my bedroom door partly open. My cat liked to walk in and out during the night, so I rarely closed it completely. That night began like any other. I had gone to bed at a normal time and fallen asleep without any trouble. I do not know how long I had been sleeping when I woke up, but it was sometime around 3 in the morning. The sound that woke me was quiet. It was the sound of my bedroom door moving. At first, I did not understand what I was hearing. I was still half asleep, lying under the covers with my eyes closed. Then, I heard the soft click of the door shutting. My bedroom door had just closed. My first sleepy thought was that the cat had somehow pushed it shut. It seemed possible at the time. Cats do strange things, especially at night. Maybe the cat had rubbed against the door or pushed it with a paw. I was tired enough that I did not question the idea immediately. I opened my eyes and stared at the dark room. For a few seconds, I stayed still and listened. Everything seemed silent. Then I noticed something unusual. There was light coming from underneath the bedroom door. A thin yellow line stretched across the floor. The light in the hallway was on. I slowly sat up in bed, trying to remember whether I had left it on before going to sleep. I normally turned off the lights at night. Electricity cost money, and I did not like sleeping with bright light coming into the bedroom. Maybe I had forgotten. That was the explanation I tried to give myself. I sat there, looking at the light under the door and searching my memory. Had I gone into the bathroom before bed? Had I turned the hallway light off afterward? I could not remember clearly. I told myself there was probably a simple reason. Then I heard footsteps. They were not coming from another apartment, they were inside mine. My heart seemed to stop for a moment. The footsteps were slow and heavy. They moved across the floor outside my bedroom, paused, and then continued toward the bathroom. I froze. My body became completely still, but my mind suddenly felt wide awake. I was alone. No one was supposed to be in my apartment. I listened, hoping I had misunderstood the sound. Maybe it was a neighbor upstairs. Maybe the building was carrying noise through the walls. Then I heard the bathroom door. Someone entered my bathroom. I could hear movement inside. There were small sounds of someone touching things, walking around, or possibly using the toilet or sink. There was no longer any way to convince myself that I was hearing a neighbor. Someone was inside my apartment. For several seconds, I could not move at all. My first thoughts were not calm or logical. I imagined the worst possibilities. I thought about a burglar, a violent stranger, or someone who had entered because they knew I lived alone. The fear that came over me was stronger than anything I had ever felt before. I was trapped in my bedroom with a stranger, only a few feet away. I looked around the dark room, trying to decide what to do. There was no second door and no easy way out. The window was not a safe option, and even if I could open it, I would have had to make noise. I also was not fully dressed. I quietly got out of bed and put on some clothes. My hands were shaking so badly that even simple movements felt difficult. I tried not to let the floor creak. Every sound seemed dangerously loud. I moved toward the bedroom door and stood beside it. The stranger was still in the bathroom. I pressed myself close to the wall and listened. I could hear him moving. I could not tell exactly what he was doing. It sounded as though he was using the bathroom normally, which somehow made the situation even stranger. If he had entered to rob me, why was he taking his time? If he knew I was inside the bedroom, why had he closed my door instead of opening it? The fact that he had shut the door bothered me more than anything else. He had entered my room while I was sleeping. He had been close enough to reach the door. He might have stood there looking at me before closing it. I had no idea how long he had been inside the apartment before I woke up. The thought made me feel sick. I tried to think of something I could use as a weapon. There was nothing nearby that made me feel safe. I was not strong, and I had no experience defending myself. If the person outside was larger than me or armed, I would have almost no chance. I felt close to passing out. My vision became strange and my legs felt weak. I sat back down on the edge of the bed because I was afraid I would fall. That was when I remembered my phone. For one hopeful second, I thought I could call the police. Then I remembered that I had left the phone in the other room. It was probably in the living room or kitchen, somewhere beyond the bedroom door and close to the stranger. There was no way to reach it without stepping into the hallway. I wanted to cry. This was before I had made a habit of keeping my phone beside the bed. I had never imagined I might need it during the night. The only device I had in the bedroom was a tablet. The tablet could connect to the internet, but it could not make a normal phone call. I grabbed it and checked the time. It was around 3 in the morning. Most of the people I knew were asleep. I tried to think of a way to get help without making noise. I opened Facebook and wrote a message explaining that someone was inside my apartment and asking anyone who saw it to call the police. My fingers shook as I typed. I worried that no one would see the post quickly enough. At 3 in the morning, there was a good chance that everyone I knew was asleep. I posted it anyway. Then I opened other apps, searching for anyone who might be online. I noticed that one of my friends was active on Steam Chat. I messaged him immediately. I told him that a stranger was in my apartment, that I was trapped in my bedroom, and that I needed him to call the police. I tried to be clear, but I was panicking so badly that my message probably looked confused. My friend responded. That small reply made me feel slightly less alone. He understood that I was serious and said he would contact the police. I stayed on the bed, holding the tablet, listening to every movement outside. The stranger remained in the apartment. I could hear footsteps moving away from the bathroom. They came back down the hallway. My breathing became shallow. The footsteps stopped outside my bedroom. The door handle moved. I stared at it. The bedroom door slowly opened. A man pushed his head into the room. For a second, neither of us spoke. I could see his face in the light from the hallway. He looked confused and unsteady. His movements were slow, and his eyes did not seem focused. Still, I had no idea what he wanted. My mind immediately went to the darkest possible place. I thought he might attack me. I thought he might come into the room, close the door, and hurt me. I remember thinking that I could be raped or killed. Those thoughts arrived all at once. The man looked at me and asked a question. "Is Robert here?" His voice sounded casual, almost as if he believed he had every right to be there. I stared at him in shock. "No," I said. I kept my answer short because I did not know what else to say. The man looked at me for another moment. Then he pulled his head back and closed the bedroom door again. I sat there, unable to believe what had just happened. He had asked for Robert. I did not know anyone named Robert who lived in my apartment. I heard the man walking away. A few seconds later, the front door opened. At first, I thought he was leaving. Then I heard more voices. I carefully approached the bedroom door and looked outside. Police officers had arrived. The relief I felt was so strong that my entire body began to shake. The officers found the man and took control of the situation. He did not fight them. He seemed confused, and it quickly became clear that he was very drunk. The police led him outside and placed him in their car. After checking the apartment and making sure no one else was inside, one of the officers spoke to me. They explained that the man had entered the wrong apartment. He had been looking for someone named Robert and apparently believed that Robert lived there. According to the police, the man was simply drunk and had become confused about which apartment he was entering. That explanation should have made me feel better. It did not. A drunk man had somehow opened my front door, walked into my home, entered the hallway, closed my bedroom door while I was sleeping, and used my bathroom. He had wandered through my apartment as though it belonged to him. Even if he had not planned to hurt me, I could not stop thinking about what might have happened. Alcohol can make people unpredictable. What if he had become angry when I said Robert was not there? What if he had mistaken me for someone else? What if he had entered the bedroom instead of closing the door? What if he had been carrying a weapon? The police treated the situation as a mistake, but to me, it did not feel like a harmless misunderstanding. It felt like someone had invaded the one place where I was supposed to be safe. After the police left, the apartment became quiet again. I locked the door and checked it several times. I walked through every room, even though the officers had already done so. I looked behind doors, inside closets, and beneath furniture. I knew the man was gone, but my body did not believe it yet. The hallway light was still on. The bathroom looked normal. Nothing appeared to be stolen or damaged. That almost made the experience feel more unreal. There was no broken window or destroyed lock. No furniture had been overturned. There were no clear signs that a stranger had been inside, except for my memory of his footsteps and his face at the bedroom door. I did not sleep for the rest of that night. I sat in bed with the lights on, holding my tablet and listening. Every sound from the building made me tense. When someone walked down the hallway outside, I thought the man had returned. When pipes made noise inside the walls, I imagined footsteps in the bathroom. The next morning, everything looked ordinary. People went to work, cars moved through the parking lot, neighbors opened and closed their doors. No one could tell that I had spent the night believing I might be attacked inside my own bedroom. For a while after that, I had nightmares. In some dreams, the bedroom door slowly closed by itself. In others, the stranger opened it and stood there without speaking. Sometimes I dreamed that I tried to call for help, but could not make a sound. I often woke suddenly and looked toward the door, expecting to see light underneath it. The worst part was not knowing exactly what the man had done before I woke up. Had he walked into my bedroom? Had he stood beside the bed? Had he noticed me sleeping and decided to close the door? Maybe he simply saw the room was occupied and thought Robert was somewhere else. Maybe there was no bad intention at all, but I would never know. That uncertainty stayed with me. I also could not understand how he had entered. I believed I had locked the front door before going to sleep. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe the lock had not caught properly. Maybe the man had tried several doors in the building until one opened. Whatever happened, I blamed myself for a long time. I kept thinking that I should have checked the lock more carefully. I should have kept my phone beside the bed. I should have had some kind of alarm or security system. But I eventually realized that I had been following a normal routine. Most people do not expect a stranger to enter their apartment at 3 in the morning. The experience made me change many habits. I started checking the front door repeatedly before bed. I would lock it, pull on the handle, unlock it, and lock it again. Sometimes I got out of bed just to check it one more time. I began keeping my phone close to me at night. I also installed a security camera. The camera gave me some comfort because I could see who was near the entrance. It recorded movement and allowed me to check the door without walking through the apartment. I became more careful about every lock. Even now, I make sure the door is fully closed and secured before I go to sleep. Some people might hear the story and laugh because the man was only drunk. They might say he made an innocent mistake. Maybe he did. But when you wake up alone at 3 in the morning and hear an unknown person walking around your home, you do not know that he is only confused. You do not know whether he is drunk, violent, armed, or dangerous. All you know is that someone has entered your private space while you were sleeping. You know that your phone is in another room. You know that the person is standing between you and the front door. You know that there is nowhere safe to run. I still think about how easily the situation could have ended differently. The man could have reacted badly when he saw me. He could have become frightened and attacked. I could have panicked and tried to fight him. The police could have arrived too late. Instead, he asked for Robert, accepted my answer, and walked away. I was lucky. My friend saw my message and understood that I needed help. The police arrived quickly. The man did not become aggressive. No one was injured. Still, the fact that the ending was not violent does not erase the fear. For those minutes, I truly believed I was in serious danger. I sat alone in a dark bedroom, listening to a stranger use my bathroom and walk through my apartment. I imagined being attacked, and I had no clear way to protect myself. That feeling stayed with me much longer than the man stayed in my home. Before that night, the sound of a door closing was ordinary. After that night, it became something else. For months, whenever my bedroom door moved, I woke immediately. If my cat pushed it during the night, my heart raced before I understood what had happened. A small line of light under the door could bring the memory back in an instant. I became aware of how fragile the feeling of safety can be. A home is only walls, doors, and locks. Most of the time, those things are enough. But sometimes one mistake, one unlocked door, or one confused stranger is all it takes to destroy that sense of security. I still do not know who Robert was. Maybe he lived in another apartment in the building. Maybe the drunk man had the wrong floor, the wrong hallway, or even the wrong building. I sometimes wonder whether he remembered what happened the next day. He may have woken up with no clear memory of entering my apartment or frightening me. To him, it might have been nothing more than a drunken mistake. To me, it became one of the most terrifying nights of my life. The part that still bothers me most is the bedroom door. He did not simply enter the apartment and walk around. He came close enough to my bed to close the door while I was sleeping. That means he knew I was there. He saw the bedroom. He may have seen me. Then he quietly shut me inside and continued wandering through my home. I will probably never understand why he did that. Maybe he was trying not to wake me. Maybe he thought he was in Robert's apartment and believed I was another person who lived there. Maybe he was too drunk to understand anything he was doing. No explanation changes how it felt to wake up and realize that I was not alone. The police removed him, the apartment was secured, and life continued. But from that night on, I never again assumed that a closed door meant I was safe. Now before I sleep, I check the locks. I make sure my phone is nearby. I check the security camera. Only then can I turn off the lights and go to bed. Even after all these years, part of me still listens for footsteps. For several years when I was a child, I had a best friend I will call M. We were almost always together. We went to the same school, spent afternoons at each other's houses, and talked about everything that seemed important when we were 9 or 10 years old. At that age, friendship felt simple. If you liked the same movies, laughed at the same jokes, and could spend hours inventing games, you were almost like family. On most weekends, Em stayed with her grandmother. Her grandmother lived in a small cottage near a local lake. It was not far from town, but it felt very different from the neighborhood where I lived. The houses around the lake were spread farther apart, and many of them were hidden behind trees. During the day, the place was peaceful. You could hear birds, boats moving across the water, and people talking from nearby yards. At night, however, the whole area became very quiet. Sometimes Em's family allowed me to go with her. I always loved those weekends. The cottage felt like a small vacation. During the day, Em and I would walk near the water, look for interesting stones, play outside, or sit on the dock. If the weather was warm, we might put our feet in the lake and dare each other to go farther into the cold water. When we got tired, we would go inside, eat snacks, and watch movies. The adults usually stayed nearby, so we never had any reason to feel afraid. One particular weekend, Em invited me to stay with her again. I do not remember everything we did that day, but I remember being excited about spending the night. We were still young enough that staying somewhere without our parents felt like an adventure. That evening, the adults decided to go out. I do not remember exactly where they were going. It may have been a restaurant, a nearby gathering, or somewhere else in town. What mattered was that they planned to leave Em and me alone in the cottage. We were only about 9 or 10 years old. Before leaving, the adults gave us very clear instructions. They told us not to answer the telephone. They told us not to answer the door. They told us not to let anyone know that we were alone. They repeated those rules enough times that I understood they were serious. We were expected to stay inside, keep the doors locked, and wait for them to return. If the phone rang, we were supposed to ignore it. If someone knocked, we were supposed to remain quiet. I was always the kind of child who followed rules, especially when adults used a serious voice. I might not have understood every danger they were worried about, but I knew the rules existed for a reason. Em was different. She was more relaxed and adventurous. She did not worry as much as I did. If an adult said not to touch something, I would stand several feet away from it. Em would usually ask what would happen if she touched it. That was one of the reasons we got along. She made me feel braver, and I sometimes kept her from doing things that were too reckless. Once the adults left, we were thrilled. The cottage suddenly belonged to us. We could sit wherever we wanted, choose whatever movie we wanted, and eat snacks without anyone reminding us to clean up. We may have turned the television louder than usual. We probably laughed too loudly and felt very grown up because there was no adult in the room telling us what to do. For a while, everything went perfectly. Outside, the sky grew darker. The lake disappeared into the night, and the windows turned into black mirrors. If I looked toward them, I could see the living room reflected in the glass, but I could not see much outside. At that age, I did not think too much about it. Em was beside me, the lights were on, and a movie was playing. I felt safe. Then the telephone rang. The sound seemed much louder than normal inside the quiet cottage. I immediately remembered the instructions. Do not answer the phone. I looked at Em, expecting her to ignore it. Instead, she stood up and walked toward the telephone. "What are you doing?" I asked. She acted as if the answer was obvious. She picked up the phone. I stared at her in disbelief. The adults had only been gone for a short time, and she had already broken one of the clearest rules they had given us. "Hello?" she said. I moved closer, trying to hear who was calling. It was a man. From the way Em reacted, she recognized him. He was someone the family knew, or at least someone familiar enough that she was not frightened by his voice. She spoke to him casually. I do not remember his name now. I am not sure I ever knew it clearly. M seemed to know who he was, and that was enough for her. The man asked questions. At some point he asked whether her grandmother or the other adults were there. M answered him honestly. She told him that the adults had gone out. Then she told him that only the two of us were there. I stood beside her making wild hand movements. I pointed at the phone, shook my head, and silently mouthed words at her. What are you doing? Stop talking. Hang up. We were specifically told not to tell anyone we were alone. M either did not understand my panic or did not care. She continued talking to the man as if nothing was wrong. I could feel my stomach tightening. Even though I was young, I understood that she had just given a stranger important information. He now knew where we were. He knew there were no adults in the cottage. He knew that two young girls were there by themselves. M finished the conversation and hung up. The moment the phone was back in its place, I confronted her. Why did you tell him we're alone? She shrugged. I reminded her what the adults had said. We were not supposed to answer the phone, and we were definitely not supposed to tell anyone that no adults were present. M acted as though I was overreacting. She said the man was someone the family knew. To her, that made everything harmless. He was not a complete stranger, so she did not see a problem. I continued arguing, but she brushed me off. Within a few minutes, I started feeling embarrassed. I was afraid I sounded like a teacher or a nervous little child. M was acting confident and relaxed, while I was repeating rules and imagining danger. I did not want her to think I was boring, so I stopped talking about it. We returned to the movie. I tried to focus on the screen, but the telephone call stayed in my mind. Every so often I looked toward the dark windows. I wondered who the man was and why he had called. Maybe he was simply checking on M's grandmother. Maybe he wanted to speak to one of the adults and had no idea they were out. There were plenty of innocent explanations. I told myself that M knew him better than I did. Nothing was going to happen. About 10 minutes later, someone knocked on the front door. The sound was sharp and clear. Both of us became still. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then a man's voice came from outside. Hey, M, it's me. He said his name, but I will not use it here. It was the same man from the phone call. My entire body went cold. M looked at me. I looked back at her. All the confidence disappeared from her face. The man knocked again. M, let me in. Neither of us moved. The movie continued playing behind us, but I no longer heard it. All I could hear was the man outside and the beating of my own heart. He had called the cottage, learned that two young girls were alone, and then arrived at the door only minutes later. Even as a child, I understood how wrong that was. If he had only wanted to visit M's grandmother, he could have waited until she returned. If he wanted to deliver something, he could have left it outside. There was no good reason for an adult man to rush to a cottage after learning that two children were there without supervision. The man knocked harder. M, I know you're in there. We remained silent. I wanted to turn off the television, but I was afraid that moving would make noise. The lights and the sound from the movie probably made it obvious that someone was inside. The man continued talking through the door. He did not sound angry at first. His voice was almost friendly. Come on. Open the door. M and I stood frozen. I kept hoping he would decide no one was home and leave. Instead, he walked away from the door. For one hopeful second, I thought it was over. Then his face appeared near one of the windows. We both jumped away. He was looking inside. The curtains did not cover every part of the glass, and because the lights were on inside, it would have been easy for him to see into the cottage. We could not see the yard clearly, but he could see us if we passed in front of the windows. We began moving around the room in panic. There was no adult to protect us. We had no cell phones. This happened before children our age carried phones everywhere. The cottage telephone was in an open area where the man might see us if we tried to reach it. Even if we called for help, we would have to speak loudly enough for someone on the other end to hear. We did not know what to do. The man moved to another window. "Em," he called. "Let me in." His voice sounded less friendly now. He walked around the outside of the cottage, checking the windows one by one. Em and I started searching for a place to hide. At first, we thought about running into a bedroom, but we were afraid he would see us crossing the room. We considered hiding in a closet, but if he broke into the cottage, we would be trapped inside. The cottage suddenly felt incredibly small. Every room had windows. Every window seemed like an eye. The man continued circling the house. We heard his footsteps moving over the ground outside. Sometimes the sound disappeared, and we could not tell where he was. Those moments were the worst because we imagined him testing a door or trying to open a window. Then he would appear again and call Em's name. I remember feeling angry at her, but I was too frightened to say anything. The adults had warned us. The rules had been simple. Do not answer the phone. Do not tell anyone we were alone. Now the exact thing they had feared was happening. But Em was just as terrified as I was, and blaming her would not help us. We needed to hide. Finally, we found a place beneath one of the windows. The wall under the window had enough space for both of us to crouch against it. From outside, the man could look through the glass, but he would not be able to see directly below the window unless he pressed his face against it and looked down. We lowered ourselves to the floor. Our shoulders touched as we huddled against the wall. I tried to make myself as small as possible. The movie was still playing somewhere behind us. Its light moved across the room, creating changing shadows on the walls. I wished we had turned it off earlier. The man came closer. His footsteps stopped outside the window above us. I held my breath. Em was beside me, completely still. A shadow moved across the glass. He was standing only a few feet away. "Em?" His voice came through the window. "I know you're in there." I covered my mouth with my hand because I was afraid he would hear me breathing. The man tapped on the glass. The sound was softer than the knocking at the door, but it frightened me even more. There was only a thin piece of glass between us. I imagined his hand coming through the window. I imagined him breaking the glass and reaching inside. I imagined him finding us crouched beneath it. At 9 or 10 years old, I did not fully understand every terrible thing that could happen, but I understood enough. I knew that adults were not always safe. I knew that a man forcing his way into a house with 2 young girls could mean something very bad. I tried not to cry. The man moved away from the window. We heard him circle the cottage again. Every few seconds, he called out to Em. Sometimes he spoke softly, as though he were trying to convince her that everything was fine. Other times, he sounded impatient. "Open up. Come on, Em, it's just me." Those words did not comfort me. The fact that he kept repeating that it was just him made the situation worse. If he were harmless, he would have understood that 2 children were frightened and left. Instead, he continued searching for a way to make us respond. Time moved strangely while we were hiding. He may have been outside for 10 minutes or 30 minutes. To me, it felt like hours. My legs began to hurt from crouching. I was afraid to shift my weight. Em and I did not speak. We barely looked at each other. Every time the man's footsteps came near, my entire body tightened. I wondered whether the doors were properly locked. I wondered whether one of the windows had been left open. I wondered whether he had a key. He was someone the family knew. Maybe he had been inside the cottage before. Maybe he knew which door had a weak lock. I thought about the adults returning and finding us gone. I thought about my parents learning that something had happened to me while I was staying with a friend. I wanted my mother more than anything. Eventually, the man returned to the front door. He knocked again and called M's name. Neither of us answered. After another long silence, his footsteps moved away. We waited. We heard him walk around the cottage one more time. Then the sounds began to fade. For several minutes, we remained beneath the window. We did not trust the silence. He might have been standing somewhere in the darkness, waiting for us to come out of hiding. He might have moved away from the windows so we would think he had left. We stayed on the floor until our legs were stiff. Finally, Em slowly lifted her head just enough to look into the room. The cottage appeared empty. She crawled away from the wall and carefully moved toward another window. I wanted to stop her, but I also needed to know whether the man was gone. She looked outside. She did not see him. We waited longer. The man did not return. Only then did we begin to relax, though neither of us felt safe. We checked the doors without opening them. They were still locked. We pulled curtains across every window we could cover. I wanted to call the adults, but I do not remember whether we did. Part of us may have been afraid of getting in trouble because M had answered the phone. Children sometimes hide dangerous situations because they are more worried about punishment than safety. It is possible we simply waited for the adults to return. I remember sitting close to M for the rest of the evening. We no longer enjoyed being unsupervised. The cottage did not feel like an adventure anymore. Every sound outside made us jump. If a branch touched the wall, I thought the man had returned. If a car passed on the road, I wondered whether it was his. The dark windows felt threatening even after the curtains were closed. Eventually, the adults came back. I do not clearly remember what we told them that night. The memory is strange in that way. I remember the fear, the knocking, the man moving from window to window, and the feeling of hiding beneath the glass. But I do not remember a dramatic conversation with the adults afterward. Maybe M did not want to admit she had broken the rules. Maybe we told them only part of what happened. Maybe they already knew the man and did not believe he was dangerous. The next day, I brought it up to M. I was still frightened and confused. I asked her who the man was and why he had come to the cottage. M acted much calmer in daylight. She said, "Oh, he's just the town drunk." She said it as if that explained everything. It did not make me feel better. In fact, it made me feel worse. Being drunk did not make his behavior harmless. A drunk adult could be unpredictable. He might become angry, confused, or violent. He might do something terrible and later claim he did not remember. More importantly, he had learned that 2 young girls were alone and had immediately come to the house. That was the part I could not forget. He had not arrived by accident. He had not stopped by without knowing who was home. He called first. He asked questions. He learned there were no adults present. Then, within 10 minutes, he was at the door demanding to be let inside. When we refused to answer, he did not leave. He walked around the cottage and looked through the windows. He called M's name over and over. He tried to make us reveal where we were hiding. To M, he may have been a familiar local man who drank too much. To me, he was an adult who had focused on 2 children after discovering they were alone. For years afterward, I thought about that night. As a child, I did not have the words to explain why the situation felt so dangerous. I only knew that every instinct in my body told me not to open the door. As I became older, the memory became even more disturbing. Adults understand boundaries. A normal adult who discovers that 2 young girls are home alone does not hurry over and demand to be allowed inside. A safe adult does not circle the house, stare through windows, and continue calling out after the children refuse to answer. Even if he believed he was only being friendly, his behavior was completely inappropriate. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if M had opened the door. She might have done it if I had not been there. Before the knock, she had treated the phone call as harmless. She trusted him because the family knew him. If she had been alone, perhaps she would have believed him when he said, "It's just me." Maybe he would have come inside, sat down, and done nothing. Maybe he only wanted company. Maybe his judgment was poor because he had been drinking. But there is no way to know. The possibility of an innocent explanation does not erase the risk. We were children. He was an adult man. He knew we were alone. He wanted access to the cottage badly enough to search every window. That is all I need to remember. I also think about the rules the adults gave us before leaving. At the time, those rules felt strict and unnecessary. Do not answer the phone. Do not answer the door. Do not tell anyone you are alone. After that night, I understood exactly why those warnings existed. Danger does not always arrive looking frightening. Sometimes it calls the house in a familiar voice. Sometimes it uses a name the family recognizes. Sometimes it says, "It's just me." Em and I were lucky that the doors were locked. We were lucky that he did not break a window. We were lucky that he eventually became tired of circling the cottage and left. Most of all, we were lucky that fear stopped M from opening the door. I do not know what the man intended to do. Maybe he truly was only the town drunk. Maybe he had no plan beyond coming inside and talking. But that explanation never comforted me. In my mind, he was a man who heard that two young girls were alone and immediately came looking for them. Even now, when I remember the dark cottage, I can hear the knocking. I can hear his voice calling M's name. I can feel the wall against my back as we crouched beneath the window, trying not to breathe. And I still believe we were right to hide. For me, there is not one single story that explains why I sometimes feel afraid in my own home. There was never one dramatic night with a shadow in the hallway, a voice calling my name from an empty room, or a figure standing at the end of my bed. It is more like a collection of small moments that should mean nothing but somehow stay in my mind for years. Each event is easy to explain on its own. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I misunderstood an ordinary sound. Maybe my brain filled in a missing detail and convinced me that something had happened when it had not. But when these things happen again and again, the explanations stop feeling as comforting as they should. The first kind of experience is the physical feeling of being touched when no one is near me. It usually happens when I am alone and not thinking about anything frightening. I might be sitting on the couch watching television, working on something, reading, or looking at my phone. I am relaxed. The room is quiet, and nothing unusual is happening. Then it feels as though someone puts a hand on my shoulder. It is not always a light feeling like clothing brushing against my skin. Sometimes it feels firm and clear, like fingers resting there for just a second. The pressure is strong enough that I immediately turn around, expecting to see someone standing behind me. There is never anyone there. The space behind the couch is empty. The doorway is empty. The room has not changed at all. For a few seconds, I remain completely still because my body is sure someone touched me, even though my eyes are telling me that no one did. Other times, the feeling happens near my waist or hip. I will be standing at the counter or walking slowly through a room when it feels like a hand presses against my side. It is the kind of touch someone might use when trying to move past you in a narrow space. That makes it more disturbing because it feels so normal. It does not feel violent or aggressive. It feels familiar. For one brief moment, my body reacts as if another person is beside me. I move over without thinking, making room for someone who is not there. Then I realize I am alone. I look around even though I already know what I will see. Nothing. No one. Only the room exactly as it was before. The feeling on my skin sometimes remains for several seconds afterward. That is the part that bothers me most. If it vanished immediately, I could tell myself it was only a muscle twitch or my clothing moving. Instead, I can still feel the place where the pressure seemed to be. Once or twice, it has felt like someone grabbed or touched my hand. That is a very difficult sensation to ignore. A shoulder can tighten. A hip can brush against furniture. But when it feels like fingers briefly close around your hand, your mind reacts immediately. I pull away. My heart begins beating faster. I stare at my own hand, as if I expect to see marks on it. There never are any. I know the human body produces strange sensations. Nerves can misfire. Muscles can move on their own. A small change in temperature can feel like a touch. I understand that. Knowing it does not stop the fear. There is something deeply unsettling about feeling touched when you are completely alone. The experiences that frighten me even more are the times when I see someone I know walk past me, when that person is not actually home. It usually happens quickly. I will be sitting in one room while looking toward a hallway or an open doorway. Something moves at the edge of my vision, and I see a family member or a partner pass by. I do not see a dark shadow or a blurry shape. For that brief second, I see the person. I recognize the way they walk. I recognize their height, their clothing, or the shape of their hair. My brain does not say, something moved. It says, they just walked past. The sight feels so normal that I often do not react right away. I assume they went into another room. Then I remember that they are not home. That realization always arrives a few seconds too late. I sit there, staring toward the doorway, replaying what I saw. Maybe I forgot they had come back. Maybe they returned quietly. Maybe I misunderstood where they were. I get up and check. I walk into the room where I saw them go. It is empty. I check the bathroom, the bedroom, and sometimes even the closet, as if a person could somehow be hiding there without making a sound. There is no one. The house remains silent. I send a message or call the person, and they tell me they are still at work, still at the store, or somewhere else across town. That is when the fear becomes real. I know peripheral vision can be unreliable. The brain is designed to recognize familiar shapes, especially human faces and bodies. A coat hanging over a chair can look like a person for a second. A shadow can seem to move. But sometimes I am completely certain of what I saw. I do not just see movement. I see them. There have also been times when I heard the voice of someone who was not home. It might be only one word or a short sound from another room. I hear the tone clearly enough to know whose voice it is. Sometimes it sounds like they called my name. Other times it sounds like they laughed, sighed, or spoke quietly to themselves. I respond without thinking. What? There is no answer. I call again. Silence. Then I remember that no one is supposed to be there. The house feels different after that. A place that felt normal a moment earlier suddenly seems too quiet. I begin listening for every small sound. The refrigerator hums. The pipes move inside the walls. A car passes outside. I know those noises are ordinary, but once I believe I heard a voice, everything becomes suspicious. The strangest moments involve sounds that are strongly connected to a specific person. Every person has small habits that become part of the background of a home. You learn the sound of the way they eat, the rhythm of their typing, the way they open a cabinet, or the particular force they use when they close a door. Those sounds become so familiar that you recognize them without needing to see the person. Sometimes I hear one of those sounds when the person is not there. I hear the clicking of a keyboard from a bedroom. I hear the refrigerator door open and close. I hear someone moving a plate in the kitchen. I hear the floor creak in the exact pattern it makes when a family member walks through the hallway. At first, I do not feel afraid because my brain accepts the sound as normal. Then, I remember I am alone. I stop whatever I am doing and listen. The sound does not repeat. I walk toward the room, already knowing it will be empty. The computer is off. The kitchen is untouched. The refrigerator door is closed. Nothing explains what I heard. Maybe the house made a sound that was similar enough for my brain to complete the rest. Maybe the refrigerator motor shifted. Maybe an object settled. Maybe a neighbor's noise traveled through the walls. Those explanations are reasonable. But when you know a sound well, it is hard to accept that you confused it with something else. I have gone into bedrooms and searched because I was so certain someone had walked inside. I have looked behind doors and checked whether windows were open. I have stood in empty rooms trying to understand why my senses told me a person was there. Of course, I always find nothing. Then there is the feeling of a presence. This is the hardest part to describe because it is not exactly a sound or a sight. It is simply the sudden certainty that someone is nearby. Sometimes it happens when I am truly alone in the house. Other times, other people are home, but they are in distant rooms. I know where everyone is, and I know no one is close to me. The air seems to change. That sounds dramatic, but I do not know how else to explain it. One moment, I am comfortable. The next, it feels as though someone has stepped into the room behind me. I do not hear footsteps. I do not see a shadow. I do not feel a touch. Still, every part of me believes someone is standing there. It feels like being near a person who is holding their breath. They are not moving or making a sound, but you know they are close. There is a quiet pressure in the room, as though the space has become smaller. The hair on my arms sometimes rises. My back tightens. I feel a powerful need to turn around, but at the same time I am afraid of what I might see. When I finally look, there is nothing. I check behind the chair, in the doorway, and down the hall. The room is empty. The feeling may remain even after I look. That is when it becomes difficult to stay where I am. I move to another room or turn on more lights. I might play music or television just to fill the silence. I feel foolish while doing it because there is no visible danger. I am reacting to nothing. Still, my body is telling me to leave. It is the same physical warning you feel when someone is watching you. Human beings are good at sensing when another person is nearby. We notice tiny movements, changes in sound, or shifts in the air without being aware of them. Maybe my brain notices something normal and interprets it incorrectly. A curtain moves. The heating system turns on. The house settles. My mind takes those small signals and builds a person out of them. That is probably what happens. At least, that is what I tell myself. The problem is that the feeling can be so specific. It does not feel like general nervousness. It feels like someone is standing in an exact place, behind the chair, near the doorway, at the end of the hallway. Sometimes I avoid looking at that spot for several minutes. I pretend to be busy, but I am aware of it the entire time. I can almost imagine the shape of a person there, silent and still. Then, without warning, the feeling disappears. The room becomes normal again. The air seems lighter. I can breathe more comfortably. Nothing visible has changed, but the sense of being watched is gone. Those moments make me question myself. Was there ever really a presence, or did my own fear create it? Did the feeling leave because whatever was there moved away? Or because my brain finally calmed down? I do not know. I have tried to find patterns. Maybe it happens more when I am tired. Maybe stress makes it worse. Maybe it happens when the house is too quiet. There are times when those explanations seem correct. If I have not slept well, my senses are more unreliable. When I am anxious, every sound feels more important. But some experiences happen when I feel perfectly fine. I can be in a good mood, fully awake, and focused on something ordinary when I suddenly feel a hand on my shoulder. That unpredictability is part of what frightens me. I cannot prepare for it. I cannot prove it. I cannot even explain it clearly to other people without sounding strange. When I tell someone, they usually offer the same explanations I give myself. It was probably a shadow. You were tired. The house was making noise. Your nerves can create sensations. They are probably right. I understand why they say those things. If someone told me the same stories, I might give them the same answers. Still, there is a difference between hearing about an experience and living through it. When you see a family member walk past you, you do not think you saw a shadow. You believe you saw that person. When you hear the exact sound of someone opening the refrigerator, you do not think it was a pipe. You believe someone is in the kitchen. When you feel a hand press against your shoulder, you do not think about nerves or muscles. You turn around. The logical explanation comes later. The fear always arrives first. I have wondered whether these experiences are connected to memory. Maybe the brain becomes so familiar with the people around us that it continues expecting them even when they are gone. If someone opens the refrigerator every evening at the same time, perhaps part of the brain waits for that sound. When another noise happens, the brain identifies it as the expected one. Maybe the same thing happens with seeing someone walk past. We recognize familiar movement so quickly that our minds sometimes make mistakes. The human brain does not show us reality exactly as it is. It takes information from the eyes, ears, and skin, then builds a picture for us. Most of the time, that picture is accurate. Sometimes it is not. That idea is both comforting and frightening. It is comforting because it means nothing supernatural has to be happening. It is frightening because it means I cannot always trust what I see, hear, or feel. If my brain can create the clear sensation of a hand on my body, what else can it create? If it can show me a person walking into a room when no one is there, how do I know which moments are real? I do not spend every day terrified. Most of the time, life is completely ordinary. The house is just a house. Sounds have normal causes. Shadows remain shadows. Then one small thing happens. A touch, a voice, a figure moving through a doorway. The feeling of someone standing behind me. For a few seconds, the normal world feels less certain. I begin checking rooms. I call out even though I know no one will answer. I turn on lights. I tell myself I am being ridiculous. Eventually, the fear passes. But I remember. The memory stays in the back of my mind, waiting for the next strange moment. That is why I cannot point to one story and say, this is the thing that scared me. It is all of them together. It is the number of times I have turned around because I felt someone touch me. It is the number of empty rooms I have searched because I was certain a person had just entered. It is the number of familiar sounds I have heard in a silent house. It is the number of times the air around me seemed to change for no reason. Each event is small. Together they make me wonder. Maybe there is a perfectly normal explanation for everything. Maybe my senses are unreliable. Maybe tiredness, memory, stress, and imagination combine in strange ways. Maybe the brain notices ordinary things and turns them into something frightening. Or maybe there are moments when we become aware of something we do not understand. I do not know which answer is worse. Part of me would rather believe in ghosts than believe my own mind can lie to me so convincingly. At least a ghost would be something outside me. If the experiences come from my brain, then there is no locked door that can keep them out. There is no room I can avoid. There is no light I can turn on to make them disappear. The brain is a wonderful thing. It stores faces, voices, habits, and feelings. It allows us to recognize the people we love from a single footstep or a small movement at the edge of our vision. But that same ability can become terrifying. The mind can fill silence with a voice. It can turn a shadow into a person. It can create a touch on empty skin. It can make an ordinary room feel occupied. Maybe I am not experiencing anything paranormal. Maybe I am not losing my mind. Maybe this is simply one of the uncomfortable ways the human brain works. I hope that is all it is. But whenever I am sitting alone and suddenly feel fingers resting on my shoulder, every reasonable explanation disappears. In that moment, I do not think about nerves, memory, or imagination. I only think one thing. Someone is standing behind me. This was not the worst thing that has ever happened to me, but it was one of those experiences that left me shaking long after it ended. It started with a small driving mistake, the kind almost everyone makes at some point, and turned into a terrifying situation that followed me all the way back to the neighborhood where I lived. At the time, I was living in the Midwest with my cousin. The area was not especially dangerous, but gun ownership was common, and the laws around carrying firearms were fairly relaxed. I knew many people who owned guns for hunting, home protection, or simply because they enjoyed collecting them. My cousin was one of those people. He had a large gun collection and knew how to use everything he owned. Before that day, I had never been particularly thankful for his collection. It was simply one of his interests. After what happened, I felt very differently. I had been driving somewhere in town, following my normal routine. I do not remember exactly where I had been going or what I had been doing before the incident. What I remember clearly is changing lanes or pulling out and accidentally cutting off another driver. It was not intentional. I did not see him in time, or I misjudged the distance between our vehicles. The moment I realized what I had done, I felt bad. I looked toward the other driver and raised my hand in what I hoped was a clear apology. I was trying to say, "Sorry, that was my mistake." Unfortunately, he did not seem to understand it that way. Maybe he thought I was waving at him sarcastically. Maybe he believed I was mocking him. Maybe he was already angry before I cut him off and simply needed a reason to direct that anger at someone. Whatever he thought, my apology only seemed to make things worse. The man began following me. At first, I was not completely sure. Sometimes two cars travel in the same direction for several turns, especially in smaller cities or suburban areas. I changed lanes, and he changed lanes behind me. I turned onto another road, and he made the same turn. I tried not to panic. I told myself that he probably lived in the same direction. There was no reason to believe he was following me personally. Then I looked in the mirror and saw him making gestures with his hands. The gestures looked like shooting motions. He pointed his fingers toward me as though they were a gun. He moved his hand in a way that made it seem like he was pretending to fire at my car. My stomach dropped. Road rage is frightening under any circumstances. But seeing a stranger make shooting motions in a place where many people legally carried firearms made the threat feel very real. I did not know whether he actually had a gun. I did not know whether he was only trying to frighten me. I did not know what kind of person he was or how far he was willing to take the situation. All I knew was that he was angry, he was following me, and he wanted me to know that he was thinking about shooting. I kept driving. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I tried to keep my speed steady because I did not want to make him more aggressive. At the same time, I wanted to get as far away from him as possible. I considered pulling over, but that seemed dangerous. If I stopped, he might block my car or get out and approach me. I did not want to be trapped inside the vehicle while he stood outside. I thought about driving to a police station, but in that moment I could not remember where the nearest one was. Panic has a strange effect on the mind. Even familiar roads can suddenly feel confusing. I should have called the police immediately. Looking back, that was clearly the smartest choice. At the time, however, I was not thinking clearly. I was focused on the car in my mirror and the angry man inside it. I continued toward my neighborhood. Then another fear entered my mind. I did not want him to know exactly where I lived. If I drove directly to the house, he would have my address. Even if he did not do anything that day, he could return later. He could recognize my car or wait nearby. So when I entered my neighborhood, I did not turn toward home. I started circling the block. I made one turn, then another, then another. The man stayed behind me. That removed any remaining doubt. He was not simply traveling in the same direction. He was following me. Every time I turned, his car appeared in the mirror a few seconds later. Sometimes he stayed close to my bumper. Other times he dropped back slightly, but he never left. I circled the neighborhood again. He followed again. The streets were familiar to me, but they no longer felt safe. I passed houses where families were eating dinner or watching television. People may have been looking out their windows without realizing that an angry stranger was chasing someone through the neighborhood. I wanted to stop and ask for help, but I was afraid of bringing danger to someone else's home. I checked the mirror again. The man was still there. He continued making aggressive movements. I could not tell whether he was yelling because our windows were closed and we were inside moving cars, but his face and body language made his anger clear. I began to imagine all the possible ways the situation could end. He could hit my car, he could force me off the road, he could pull up beside me and fire through the window. He could follow me until I ran out of gas. I had no idea what to do. Instead of calling the police, I called my cousin. It was not the best decision, but he was the person I trusted most in that moment. I was living with him, and he knew the neighborhood. I thought he might tell me where to go or come meet me somewhere. When he answered, I quickly explained what had happened. I told him that I had accidentally cut someone off, tried to apologize, and that the man had followed me into our neighborhood. I told him about the shooting gestures and that I was circling the block because I did not want to lead him directly to the house. My voice was probably shaking. I expected my cousin to tell me to keep driving or call the police. Instead, he laughed. Not because he thought I was in danger for no reason, but because he seemed completely confident that the situation could be handled. "Drive home now," he said. "I'll be waiting outside." For a moment, I was not sure whether I had heard him correctly. He wanted me to lead the man directly to the house. That was exactly what I had been trying to avoid. But my cousin sounded calm and certain. He was not asking questions or hesitating. I trusted him. I told him I was coming. Then I turned toward the house. The man remained behind me. As I drove through the final streets of the neighborhood, my heart pounded harder. I did not know what my cousin planned to do. Part of me hoped the man would finally lose interest before we reached the driveway. Maybe he would realize he had gone too far. Maybe he would see that I was heading home and decide the confrontation was no longer worth it. He did not. He followed me all the way. I turned into the driveway. The man turned in behind me. That was the moment when the situation became even more frightening. Until then, he could have claimed that he was simply driving through the neighborhood. Once he entered a private driveway behind me, his intentions were obvious. He wanted a confrontation. I stopped the car but did not immediately get out. My hands remained on the steering wheel. I watched him in the mirror. His car was close behind mine, partially blocking my way out. If I needed to leave quickly, I might not be able to back up. I wondered whether I had made a terrible mistake by coming home. Then the front door opened. My cousin stepped outside. He was carrying his AR-15. He did not run. He did not wave it wildly. He simply walked out of the house with complete confidence and started moving toward the man's car. From where I was sitting, my cousin looked almost proud. The message was immediate and impossible to misunderstand. The man who had followed me believed he was chasing someone who was alone and frightened. He had probably expected me to stop somewhere so he could threaten me or start a fight. He had not expected an armed adult to be waiting at the house. The reaction was instant. The man threw his car into reverse so quickly that his tires made noise against the driveway. For a second, it looked like he might lose control. He backed out with so much speed that the movement reminded me of a scene from a racing movie. He nearly Tokyo drifted out of the driveway. Then he turned into the street and sped away. He did not stop to yell. He did not make any more shooting gestures. He did not try to explain himself. The moment he saw my cousin approaching with the rifle, all of his courage disappeared. Within seconds, he was gone. I stayed inside the car, breathing hard. My cousin lowered the rifle and looked at me as if the problem had been solved in the most obvious way possible. To him, the situation may have seemed almost funny. To me, it had been terrifying. I got out of the car slowly. My legs felt weak and my hands were still shaking. I looked toward the end of the street, half expecting the man to return. He did not. My cousin asked if I was okay. I told him I was, though I was not completely sure. Physically, nothing had happened to me. The man had not hit my car. He had not fired a gun. He had not even left his vehicle. But for several minutes, I truly believed I might be attacked or shot. The fear did not disappear simply because he drove away. Once I was inside the house, I replayed the entire incident in my mind. I thought about the moment I cut him off. I wondered whether I had done something worse than I realized. Maybe I had come close to causing an accident. Maybe I had frightened him. But even if I had made a serious driving mistake, nothing justified following someone into their neighborhood and making shooting gestures. People make mistakes on the road every day. Most drivers become angry, honk their horn, and continue with their lives. This man chose to follow me. He made several turns behind me. He circled the block more than once. He entered my driveway. That was not a quick emotional reaction. He had time to stop. He had time to realize that what he was doing was dangerous and irrational. He continued anyway. I also thought about how different the situation might have been if I had been living alone. If no one had been waiting at the house, what would the man have done when I stopped? Would he have gotten out of his car? Would he have approached my window? Would he have pulled out a weapon? I will never know. Maybe he only wanted to frighten me. Maybe he wanted to yell and feel powerful. Maybe he would have driven away after seeing where I lived. But after watching him follow me through several turns and into a private driveway, I did not feel comfortable assuming the best. The shooting gestures stayed in my mind. It is easy to tell yourself that someone is only pretending until you remember that real guns are common. In the Midwest, plenty of people keep firearms in their vehicles. The man could have been armed. That possibility changed everything. My cousin's response was risky too, and looking back, I know the situation could have escalated. The stranger might have had a weapon and decided to use it when he saw the rifle. He could have panicked and driven into my car. A neighbor could have called the police and reported an armed man walking outside. There were many ways it could have gone wrong. Thankfully, none of them happened. The man saw my cousin and immediately left. At the time, I felt extremely grateful for my cousin's gun collection. Before that day, the rifles and other firearms had seemed like things he owned because he enjoyed them. I did not think they would ever have anything to do with me. That day, the sight of one rifle ended a dangerous situation in seconds. Still, The experience also taught me that I should have handled the chase differently. I should have called the police while I was still driving. I should have given them my location, the description of the man's car, and his license plate if I could see it safely. I could have driven toward a police station, fire station, or busy public place. I could have avoided bringing the man into a residential driveway. Those options would have been safer than creating an armed confrontation. But fear makes people do strange things. In that moment, I did not think like someone calmly reviewing a list of safety instructions. I thought like someone being chased. I wanted a familiar voice. I wanted someone I trusted to tell me what to do. That person was my cousin. His answer may not have been the safest possible solution, but it worked. For a while afterward, I became much more careful while driving. Everyone makes mistakes, but I paid more attention before changing lanes or pulling into traffic. I also became cautious about how I responded to angry drivers. Before the incident, I would sometimes look toward another driver and try to apologize or explain through gestures. Afterward, I learned that people can misunderstand even friendly movements. A wave can look sarcastic. An apology can look like a challenge. When someone is already angry, they may interpret anything in the worst possible way. I also learned never to drive straight home if I suspect someone is following me. That was one decision I made correctly. Even though I eventually went home because my cousin told me to, my first instinct not to reveal my address was sensible. A person who follows you might return later, especially if they learn where you park your car or which house is yours. The better choice would be to drive to a police station or a crowded, well-lit location while calling for help. At the time, however, I was young and panicking. I did the best I could with the thoughts moving through my head. For several days, I watched for the man's car. Every time a vehicle slowed near the house, I looked through the window. I worried he might come back with friends. I worried that he had remembered the address. I worried that seeing my cousin's rifle had embarrassed him and made him want revenge. Nothing happened. I never saw him again. The whole incident may have lasted only a short time, but fear made it feel much longer. The endless turns around the neighborhood, the hand gestures in the mirror, and the final drive toward the house all seemed to stretch out. Even now, I can remember looking into the rearview mirror and seeing his car still there. I remember thinking that one accidental lane change had somehow turned a stranger into an enemy. Road rage is frightening because you know almost nothing about the other person. You do not know how stable they are. You do not know whether they have had a terrible day. You do not know whether they are drunk, high, armed, or simply looking for someone to fight. You might make a small mistake, but their reaction can be completely unreasonable. That was what happened to me. I made a driving error and tried to apologize. The man responded by following me through town, making shooting gestures, circling my neighborhood, and entering my driveway. He seemed fearless as long as he believed I was alone. The moment my cousin walked outside with an AR-15, the man suddenly remembered he had somewhere else to be. I am not saying the situation was handled perfectly. Calling the police would have been smarter. Driving to a safe public place would have been better. An armed confrontation could easily have become a tragedy. But in that moment, I was frightened and out of ideas. My cousin was the person I called, and he was ready when I arrived. The man left so fast that he nearly lost control of his car. Nothing was fired. No one was injured. The chase ended. I was very grateful for my cousin that day. I was also very grateful for the collection of guns I had previously thought was excessive. Most importantly, I learned something I have never forgotten. A stranger's anger on the road can follow you much farther than you expect. Since then, when another driver becomes aggressive, I do not argue, gesture, or try to prove a point. I create distance. I avoid going home, and I call the police. Yesterday, my son went to a birthday party. It was the usual kind of children's party, with loud music, too much sugar, paper plates, small plastic toys, and balloons tied to nearly everything. When he came home, he was carrying a bright yellow balloon by its string. The balloon was beginning to lose a little helium, but it was still floating well above the floor. It followed him through the front door, bumping softly against the ceiling as he walked. He seemed strangely proud of it, as children often are with things that adults would consider completely ordinary. He carried it around the house for most of the afternoon. It floated behind him while he moved from room to room, occasionally getting caught against a doorway or tangled around a chair. Every time that happened, he carefully rescued it and continued dragging it around as if it were an important guest. At some point, he brought the balloon to me and asked if I could draw a skull on it. I did not ask why he wanted a skull. Children make strange requests, and this one seemed harmless enough. I found a black marker and held the balloon steady while I drew 2 dark eye sockets, a small nose, and a row of uneven teeth. I was not trying to create anything especially frightening. It was more like the kind of cartoon skull you might see on a pirate flag. When I finished, my son looked pleased. The skull's face was slightly crooked because the balloon kept moving while I drew it. One eye was larger than the other, and the smile looked almost too wide. From certain angles it looked silly. From others, it looked much more disturbing than I had intended. My son did not seem bothered. He took the balloon and continued playing with it. By the evening, the balloon had drifted away from him and was floating around the house on its own. The string dragged lightly across the floor, sometimes catching on the edge of the carpet. Whenever the heat came on or someone opened a door, the movement of air pushed the balloon into another room. None of this seemed unusual. It was only a balloon. Later that night, the children were settling down, and the house became quieter. My wife went into the bathroom while I was sitting in the living room. A few minutes passed. Then I heard her call my name. There was something uncertain in her voice. She asked me to come and look at something. At first, I thought there was a spider in the bathroom or a problem with one of the children. My wife sometimes called me to deal with insects, strange noises, or anything else she did not want to investigate herself. I got up from the couch and walked toward her. She was standing near the bathroom doorway, looking into the bedroom. "What is it?" I asked. She pointed. The yellow balloon had floated past her while she was in the bathroom. It had moved slowly down the hall and entered the bedroom. That alone was not especially strange. The house had small air currents, and the balloon was light enough to move with almost any change in pressure. Someone walking past it could send it drifting several feet. The strange part was where it had stopped. The balloon was floating inside the bedroom at about the height of an adult's head. The skull I had drawn was facing the closet. It was not turned slightly toward the closet. It was positioned as if it were looking directly inside. The closet door was open just enough to reveal darkness between the hanging clothes. The balloon remained completely still. I stood in the doorway and looked at it for several seconds. The room was quiet. The curtains were closed and the windows were shut. There was no fan running. The air did not seem to be moving. Still, the balloon floated in one spot with the black skull facing the closet. I should probably explain why this bothered my wife more than it would have bothered most people. My job requires me to travel fairly often. Sometimes I am away for several days, leaving my wife at home alone with the children. She has always had an active imagination, especially at night. She notices shadows. She hears small sounds. If the house creaks, she imagines someone walking through the hallway. If a coat hangs in an unusual way, she may see the outline of a person. I usually tease her about it, though not too much, because I know the fear feels real to her. For some time, She had been telling me that she occasionally saw a white figure near the bedroom closet. She said it usually happened at night when she was alone. Sometimes she would wake up and think something pale was standing near the open closet door. Other times, she would be walking past the room and catch a glimpse of a white shape watching her from the darkness. Whenever she turned on the light or looked directly at it, nothing was there. I always told her it was probably clothing. We had light-colored shirts and dresses hanging in the closet. In darkness, a white sleeve or a gap between clothes could easily look like a person. She insisted that it did not look like clothing. She said it looked like a figure. According to her, it stood silently inside the closet and watched the room. I never saw it. Whenever I was home, the closet was simply a closet. There were shoes on the floor, clothes hanging from the rail, and boxes stacked on the upper shelf. There was nothing mysterious about it. I believed my wife's imagination was turning normal shapes into something frightening. That night, however, the yellow balloon seemed to be staring directly into the same place where she claimed the white figure sometimes stood. I stepped closer to the room. The balloon did not move. Its string hung straight down, ending a few inches above the carpet. The skull's large black eyes faced the darkness inside the closet. I looked toward my wife. "That's creepy," I said. She did not appreciate hearing that from me. Usually, I was the person who told her not to worry. I was supposed to explain that the shadow was caused by a coat or that the noise came from the heating system. Instead, I had just confirmed that the scene looked strange. She called me into the room, but she remained several steps behind me. I moved closer to the balloon. At that height, it looked less like a child's toy and more like a floating head. The uneven skull face seemed to be watching the closet with great interest. I tried to understand what had caused it to stop there. The heating system may have pushed it down the hall. The string might have caught briefly on the carpet and then released. The balloon could have spun naturally until the drawn face happened to point toward the closet. There were many reasonable explanations. The problem was that none of them made the sight less unsettling. I turned toward my wife. I pointed out that the balloon was almost exactly at head level. She told me to stop talking. I said it looked as though someone was standing in the bedroom and staring into the closet. She told me again to stop. I was half joking, but only half. The longer I stared at it, the less funny it seemed. My wife finally moved closer. She came into the bedroom cautiously, staying near the wall. She did not take her eyes off the balloon. For several seconds, nothing happened. We stood together watching the skull look into the closet. Then the balloon began to turn. It moved slowly at first. The skull's face rotated away from the closet. My wife grabbed my arm. The balloon continued spinning until the face was turned directly toward us. Then it stopped. We both froze. The skull was now looking at us. There may have been a slight movement of air when my wife entered the room. Maybe our body heat created enough of a current to turn the balloon. Perhaps the string had been twisted and finally unwound. I knew all of that. But in the moment, it did not feel random. It looked deliberate. It looked as though the balloon had been staring into the closet, sensed us watching, and turned to acknowledge our presence. The large black eye sockets seemed fixed on us. My wife made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a whisper. I tried to stay calm. "It's just the air," I said. She did not answer. The balloon drifted slightly closer. That was when my wife placed both hands against my back and pushed me toward it. Then she ran. She did not step behind me for protection. She did not suggest that we leave the room together. She pushed me directly toward the floating skull and escaped into the hallway. I stumbled forward, nearly walking face first into the balloon. For a second, the skull filled my entire view. Its black eyes and crooked teeth were only inches from my face. The balloon bumped softly against my forehead. I heard my wife running away behind me. At that exact moment, I learned something important about my marriage. If we were ever attacked by a ghost, monster, murderer, or anything else, my wife would sacrifice me without hesitation. There would be no discussion. She would not stop to consider another plan. She would push me toward the danger and save herself. I turned around and found her several feet down the hallway. She was watching from a safe distance. "Did you seriously just push me?" I asked. She tried to defend herself by saying I was closer to the balloon anyway. That was not true. She had clearly used me as a human shield. I looked back toward the bedroom. The balloon had moved slightly after hitting me. It was now floating near the bed, slowly turning in place. It no longer seemed to be watching the closet or us. It looked like an ordinary yellow balloon again. I reached up and grabbed the string. The moment I held it, all the mystery disappeared. The balloon was light and harmless. The skull was only black marker. The strange movement had almost certainly been caused by air circulating through the house. I carried it out of the bedroom. My wife did not come closer until I had firm control of the string. She asked what I was going to do with it. I told her I might tie it to her side of the bed. She said that if I did, she would sleep somewhere else. The children had no idea what had happened. To them, it was still the same balloon from the birthday party. My son saw me holding it and immediately wanted it back. I handed it to him. He smiled at the skull and carried it away, completely unaware that his mother had nearly offered his father to it as a sacrifice. For the rest of the night, my wife kept watching the balloon. Whenever it moved through the room, her eyes followed it. Once, it drifted toward the hallway, and she immediately asked me where it was going. I reminded her that balloons do not have plans. She did not find that comforting. Eventually, I tied the string to a chair so it could not float freely through the house. Even then, the balloon moved whenever the air changed. Its skull face slowly turned toward different parts of the room. Sometimes it faced the television. Sometimes it looked toward the kitchen. Once, it turned in my wife's direction, and she immediately moved to another seat. I laughed at her, though I understood why she was uncomfortable. The image of the balloon facing the closet had stayed with me too. It was such a simple thing, but the timing made it feel strange. My wife had already spent nights believing that something white watched her from the closet. Then a balloon with a skull drawn on it floated into the bedroom and stopped in front of that exact place. It hovered at the same height as a human head. When we approached, it turned to face us. Nothing about it proved anything supernatural was happening. Still, if someone wanted to create a frightening scene, they could not have arranged it much better. Later, when the children were asleep, I checked the closet. My wife watched from the doorway while I moved clothes aside and looked behind the hanging coats. There was nothing there. I checked the floor, the shelf, and the corners. No white figure was hiding inside. I pointed out a pale shirt that could easily look like a person in poor light. My wife said that was not what she had seen. I found a white robe hanging near the back. She said it was not that either. According to her, the figure had a shape more like a person. She said it sometimes appeared taller than the clothes and seemed to lean forward from the darkness. I told her that when people are frightened, the brain fills in details. She asked why the balloon had been looking at the same spot. I did not have an answer she found satisfying. I repeated that it was probably an air current. She asked why the balloon had stopped moving. I said the air must have become still. She asked why it turned to face us at the exact moment she entered the room. I said her movement probably disturbed the air. She looked unconvinced. The truth was that I understood every scientific explanation, but I had also been standing there when it happened. I had watched the skull slowly turn toward us. For those few seconds, it had felt as though something was looking back. That was enough to make even a reasonable person uncomfortable. Before bed, I moved the balloon into another room. My wife asked me to put it somewhere the children would not find it during the night. I tied it securely to a heavy piece of furniture. Then, I checked the knot twice. I also closed the closet door. My wife normally left it partly open, but that night, she wanted it completely shut. After we got into bed, she asked whether I thought the balloon had really moved on its own. I said balloons always move on their own. She said that was not what she meant. I knew exactly what she meant. She wanted to know if I thought something in the closet had attracted it. I told her no. I said the balloon was filled with helium, the house had changing air pressure, and the hallway created a natural path into the bedroom. That explanation was logical. It was also true. At least, I believed it was. My wife remained silent for a while. Then she asked what I would do if the balloon was back in the bedroom when we woke up. I told her I would know she had moved it to frighten me. She promised she would not touch it. I promised that I would not either. We went to sleep with the closet door closed. During the night, I woke up once because I heard a soft sound in the hallway. It sounded like something rubbing against the wall. I stayed in bed and listened. The sound stopped. I thought about getting up to check the balloon, but I decided against it. There are moments when curiosity is not worth the effort. My wife was asleep beside me, and I did not want to wake her. More importantly, I did not want to open the bedroom door and find the yellow skull waiting on the other side. In the morning, the balloon was still tied where I had left it. The string had not come loose. Nothing unusual had happened. The house looked normal, in daylight. The closet was only a closet. The balloon was only a balloon. My wife still insisted that the whole thing had been extremely creepy. I agreed. She then tried to change the subject whenever I mentioned the fact that she had pushed me toward it. I did not allow her to forget. I explained that her reaction revealed important information about our relationship. If a dangerous situation ever occurred, I now knew her survival plan. Step 1 would be to place me between herself and the threat. Step 2 would be to run. She argued that I was bigger and should protect her. I pointed out that she had not asked for protection. She had physically launched me at the danger. She said she panicked. I told her that was exactly the problem. People reveal their true instincts during moments of fear, and her instinct was to feed me to the haunted balloon. She laughed, but she never denied it. For the next few days, the yellow balloon slowly lost helium. Each day it floated lower. At first, it remained near head level. Then it dropped to chest height. Eventually, it hovered only a few feet above the floor. As it shrank, the skull's face became wrinkled and distorted. The eye sockets bent inward. The smile twisted. It looked even more disturbing than before. My son still liked it. He dragged it around the house by the string while the damaged skull bounced behind him. My wife avoided it whenever possible. If the balloon entered the bedroom, she immediately carried it back out or called me to deal with it. She also began keeping the closet door closed. I noticed that she checked it before bed. She never admitted that the balloon had made her fear worse, but it clearly had. I tried not to tease her too much. Although the situation had been funny in the end, I knew her fear was real. When someone already believes they have seen a figure watching from a closet, a floating skull turning toward them is not an easy thing to dismiss. I still do not believe there was anything supernatural about it. The balloon moved because air was moving through the house. It faced the closet by chance. It turned because my wife entered the room. Those are the most reasonable explanations. Still, I occasionally think about the timing. Out of every room in the house, the balloon floated into our bedroom. Out of every direction it could have faced, The skull looked into the closet. Out of every moment it could have turned, it moved just as my wife came to stand beside me. Maybe it was all coincidence. Most frightening things are. An ordinary event happens at the right time, and the brain connects it to an existing fear. The result feels meaningful even when it is not. I understand that, but understanding something does not always remove the feeling it creates. For those few seconds, the balloon did not look like a toy. It looked like a floating head staring into a dark closet. Then it looked at us. That is the image I remember. Not the birthday party, not my son asking for a drawing, not the balloon tied safely to a chair the next morning. I remember the silent bedroom, the open closet, and the black skull slowly turning in our direction. I also remember my wife's hands hitting my back. That may be the most disturbing part of the entire experience. The balloon was probably harmless. My wife, however, had proven that she was willing to sacrifice me. Now I know that if she ever sees the white figure again while I am home, I should not stand in front of her, I should stay near the door. Because if anything comes out of that closet, I already know which one of us she is going to push toward it. Mine is not a story with a clear ending. It is still happening, and as far as I can tell, it may continue for a long time. For the past 5 years, I have been stalked by a man who believes he has some kind of relationship with me. He is not an ex-boyfriend. He is not someone I dated. He is not a former friend, co-worker, or even someone I knew well. All I did was take a college class. He sat next to me. That was it. That was the beginning of everything. I barely spoke to him. I did not spend time with him outside class. I did not give him my number, invite him anywhere, or show any romantic interest in him. As far as I was concerned, he was just another student sitting nearby. Then he started following me. At first, the things he did were small enough that I could doubt myself. I would see him near the building after class. Then I would notice him in the parking lot. Sometimes he seemed to be walking in the same direction as me. I told myself it was probably a coincidence because we attended the same college. Colleges are busy places. Students cross the same paths every day. People park in the same areas, eat in the same places, and follow similar schedules. I did not want to assume the worst. Then I started seeing him near my workplace. The first time, I thought maybe he had business in the area. The second time, it felt strange. By the third or fourth time, I knew it was not an accident. He was following me from school to work. I had never told him where I worked. I do not know how he found out. That was when the fear started. It is difficult to explain the moment when someone stops being a harmless stranger and becomes a threat. There is no clear line. One day you are telling yourself that you are overreacting. The next day, you are checking the parking lot before leaving a building. I started watching for his car. I changed the times I left work. I asked coworkers to walk outside with me. Sometimes I waited inside until I thought he was gone. I tried different routes home. I hoped that if I refused to acknowledge him, he would become bored and leave me alone. He did not. His behavior became worse. He began appearing in places he had no reason to be. He followed me more openly. He watched me from a distance and sometimes tried to approach me. I made it clear that I wanted no contact with him. That did not matter. In his mind, he had already created a relationship between us. Eventually, I learned that he believed we were married. Not that he wanted to marry me. Not that we might one day become a couple. He was completely convinced that we were already husband and wife. The idea was terrifying because there was no truth behind it. We had never dated. We had never kissed. We had never gone out for coffee. We had not shared any kind of private or romantic relationship. We had sat near each other in a college classroom. That was enough for him to build an entire marriage in his mind. Reasoning with him was impossible. Telling him the truth did not change anything. Saying, "I do not know you," did not matter. Saying, "We are not married," did not matter. Saying, "Stay away from me," did not matter. He had decided that his version of reality was more important than mine. Over time, the stalking changed every part of my life. I could not simply wake up, go to work, and come home. Every trip required thought. Before walking to my car, I checked around me. Before entering the car, I looked into the back seat. When I drove, I watched the mirrors to see if anyone followed. If a car made the same turns as me, my heart started racing. Sometimes it was nothing. Sometimes it was only another person going in the same direction. But I could never be sure. That uncertainty became part of my daily life. I changed jobs because of him. Leaving a job is not a small thing. It affects your income, schedule, future plans, and sense of stability. Most people leave because they find a better opportunity or want to move in a different direction. I left because a dangerous man knew where to find me. I hoped a new workplace would give me a fresh start. For a while, it seemed possible. Then he found me again. I changed my appearance. I altered my hair, my clothes, and the way I presented myself. I tried to look different enough that he might not immediately recognize me in public. Changing my appearance should have been a personal choice. Instead, it became a survival decision. Every time I looked in the mirror, I was reminded that my own face had become a problem. I was not changing because I wanted to. I was changing because I was trying to hide. Nothing stopped him. He found ways to continue following me. He learned my routines. He followed members of my family. That was when the fear became even worse. It was no longer only about me. When someone stalks you, you begin to worry about everyone connected to you. Parents, siblings, cousins, friends, partners, co-workers, and even neighbors can become part of the danger. I began asking family members whether they had seen unfamiliar cars. I warned them not to share information about me. I worried that he might follow them to find out where I was. I worried that he might approach them and pretend to be someone important in my life. Because he believed we were married, he could easily tell people that he was my husband. Some people might believe him. Others might provide information without realizing they were helping someone dangerous. I had to explain the situation repeatedly. I had to tell people that this man was not my partner and never had been. I had to ask them not to speak to him. I had to make sure they understood that even a small detail, such as where I worked or when I would be home, could put me at risk. The stalking was not limited to watching and following. He tried to kidnap me. Even now, saying those words feels unreal. Kidnapping sounds like something from a crime documentary or a dramatic news story. It does not sound like something that should happen because you sat beside the wrong person in a college class. But it happened. I will not describe every detail because even thinking about it makes me feel sick. What matters is that he tried to take control of me physically and remove my ability to choose where I went. That was the moment when any remaining doubt disappeared. This was not a confused man with an unhealthy crush. This was someone willing to use force. He later assaulted me with a deadly weapon. Again, there is something strange about writing that sentence. You expect a person who assaults someone with a weapon to be taken away forever. You expect the system to step in and make sure the victim is protected. Reality is not always that simple. Even after violence, even after reports, even after evidence, the fear does not automatically end. I got a no-contact order against him. On paper, the order told him to stay away from me. He was not supposed to contact me, approach me, follow me, or come near my home or workplace. For most people, a court order would be serious enough to stop them. For him, it was only another rule to ignore. A piece of paper cannot physically stop someone from walking toward your house. It cannot block a car from following you. It cannot stand beside you while you unlock your front door. It cannot guarantee that the police will arrive before something happens. The order gave me legal protection, but it did not make me feel safe. He continued. For years, he did not know exactly where I lived. That was one of the few things that gave me comfort. He knew where I worked at different times. He knew places I visited. He knew how to follow me and people close to me. But my home was still separate. I treated my address like a secret. I avoided giving it out unless absolutely necessary. I asked people not to share it. I watched carefully when driving home, sometimes taking long routes to make sure no one was behind me. Then, recently, he found my house. When I learned that he knew where I lived, something inside me changed. Home had been the last place where I could pretend to relax. It had not been completely safe because I always worried he might find it, but at least I could close the door and believe there was distance between us. Now he shows up at my home. The place where I sleep is no longer private. The place where my family should feel safe is now another location he can reach. Every sound outside makes me look through the window. Every car slowing near the house makes me nervous. If someone knocks unexpectedly, no one opens the door without checking first. I have to think about cameras, locks, lights, and escape plans. I think about which room would be safest if he entered. I think about how quickly the police could arrive. I think about whether the windows are strong enough. I think about whether the doors would hold. I think about things no one should have to consider inside their own home. Because of him, I may have to move. Moving is expensive and exhausting. It means packing your life into boxes, changing addresses, finding a new place, and starting over. Most people move because they want a bigger home, a better neighborhood, or a new beginning. I may have to move because a man I barely knew has decided he owns part of my life. Even moving may not solve anything. I already changed jobs. I changed my appearance. I changed routines. I got legal protection. I tried hiding where I lived. He still found me. There is no guarantee that a new address would remain secret. There is no guarantee he would not follow a family member. There is no guarantee he would not search records, watch familiar places, or wait until he saw me again. That is the most exhausting part. There is no clear action that ends the problem. People often give simple advice. Just call the police. Get a restraining order. Move, change your number. Block him. Stay with family. Buy cameras. I have taken precautions. I have involved authorities. I have changed major parts of my life. But someone who refuses to accept reality does not always respond to normal limits. Blocking a phone number does not stop someone from appearing in person. Changing jobs does not help if they follow your family. Moving does not guarantee they will not find you. A no-contact order does not create an invisible wall. Living this way changes how you think. I used to walk through parking lots without studying every person around me. Now I notice where cars are parked. I notice who is sitting inside them. I notice when the same vehicle appears more than once. I notice exits. I notice places where I could run. I notice whether there are other people nearby. I notice whether someone is walking too close behind me. I cannot simply be present in a place. Part of my mind is always watching. That constant awareness is exhausting. Even when he is not there, the possibility of him is. That is what stalking does. The stalker does not need to be standing in front of you to control your day. The fear travels with you. It follows you into stores, workplaces, parking lots, and family gatherings. It sits beside you in the car. It waits outside the bathroom door. It lies awake with you at night. I have trouble feeling safe, even when people tell me I am safe. A locked door does not feel strong enough. A quiet street does not feel peaceful. A normal day does not feel normal because I am waiting for the moment he appears again. Sometimes I think I see him in crowds. A certain jacket, hairstyle, or way of walking can make my stomach drop. I look again and realize it is someone else. The relief lasts only a moment because I know the real danger still exists. I am terrified of coming home. That sentence sounds strange because home is supposed to be the place you want to return to. For me, arriving home brings a new set of fears. Before turning onto my street, I check behind me. I look for unfamiliar vehicles. I study the area near the house. When I open the door, I listen. I worry he may already be inside. I worry he may be waiting nearby. I worry that one day I will come home and find that he has harmed my family. That is the thought that scares me most. I can try to protect myself. I can change my routine, carry my phone, stay in public, and avoid being alone. My family cannot stay alert every second. They should not have to live like targets because of someone they never chose to know. I imagine opening the door and finding the house silent. I imagine seeing signs of a struggle. I imagine calling out and receiving no answer. I imagine that he might hurt them to punish me or force me to respond. I know these thoughts are terrible, but after everything he has already done, they do not feel impossible. He has tried to kidnap me. He has used a deadly weapon against me. He has followed my relatives. He has come to my house. He believes I am his wife. There is no normal limit I can expect him to respect. Sometimes I wonder what he thinks our marriage means. Does he believe I owe him attention? Does he believe I belong to him? Does he interpret my fear as part of some relationship? Does he think the police, the court order, and my attempts to escape are simply obstacles keeping us apart? I do not know. I do know that his belief makes him more dangerous. A person who accepts reality can understand rejection. A person who has created an entire relationship in his mind may see rejection as betrayal. That is what frightens me. To me, he is a stranger who sat next to me in class. To him, I may be a spouse who has run away. Those two realities cannot be resolved through a conversation. There is nothing I can say that I have not already made clear. I do not love him. I do not know him in the way he imagines. We were never together. We are not married. I want no contact. I want him to leave me and my family alone. None of those facts seem to reach him. People sometimes ask whether I accidentally encouraged him. That question makes me angry. I sat next to him in class. That is not encouragement. Being polite is not a promise. Sharing a room with someone is not consent. A brief conversation is not a relationship. No one has the right to claim another person simply because they noticed them. I have replayed that class in my mind many times. I try to remember whether I said something he misunderstood. Maybe I smiled. Maybe I answered a question. Maybe I handed him a paper or moved my chair. Whatever happened, it could not justify 5 years of stalking and violence. The truth is that there may have been nothing at all. He may have chosen me because I happened to be there. That idea is almost worse. If I had dated him, people could point to a past relationship and say the obsession began there. There is no past relationship. There is only a seat in a classroom. My entire life changed because of where I sat. For 5 years, I have had to think about safety in ways most people never do. I have had to collect evidence. I have had to tell the same story to authorities. I have had to explain why I am afraid. I have had to prove that the danger is real. I have had to make choices about work, family, appearance, housing, and daily movement based on someone else's obsession. He has taken time from me. He has taken sleep. He has taken privacy. He has taken the feeling that my home belongs to me. The only thing he has not taken is my understanding of the truth. We are not married. We were never together. I do not belong to him. His belief does not create a relationship. His obsession does not create love. Fear is not love. Control is not love. Following someone is not love. Threatening them is not love. Trying to kidnap them is not love. Hurting them with a weapon is not love. I know that. My family knows that. The law knows that. He is the only one who refuses to accept it. I do not know how this story ends. That is what makes it different from most frightening experiences. There is no final moment when the danger leaves. There is no scene where the door closes behind him, and I know he is gone forever. There is only today, tomorrow, and the next time he appears. Maybe moving will help. Maybe stronger security will help. Maybe the no-contact order will eventually have greater consequences. Maybe authorities will finally find a way to keep him away permanently. I hope so. Until then, I live with the fear. Every day I worry that he will show up. Every day I worry that he will find a new way around whatever protection I put in place. Every day I worry that he will hurt someone I love. The worst part is knowing that I did nothing to bring this into my life. I went to college. I entered a classroom. I sat down. A man sat beside me. 5 years later, I am changing jobs, changing my appearance, considering another move, checking locks, watching cameras, and wondering whether my family will be alive when I return home. That is my ongoing nightmare. It did not begin with a relationship. It began with a seat in a classroom, and it still has not ended. This may sound mild compared to some of the frightening things other people have experienced, but it has stayed with me for most of my life. It began when I was around 10 or 11 years old, during a bad case of influenza. I had been sick before, like most children, but this was different. The fever was extremely high, and I felt as if my whole body had been taken over by something I could not control. I was weak, dizzy, and unable to think clearly. My skin felt burning hot, but at the same time, I sometimes shook beneath the blankets, as though I were freezing. My parents kept checking on me, giving me water and medicine, and trying to make me comfortable. I spent most of my time in bed because I did not have the energy to do anything else. Even sitting up for too long made me tired. The worst part was sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I seemed to fall into another horrible dream. These were not ordinary nightmares. They did not feel like the kind of dream where something strange happens and you wake up knowing it was not real. The fever made everything feel sharper, darker, and more confusing. The dreams seemed to continue even when I was partly awake. Sometimes I could not tell whether I was still dreaming or looking around my real bedroom. The shadows on the walls seemed to move. Familiar objects looked wrong. My furniture seemed too large or too far away. The room sometimes felt as if it were stretching around me. When I did fall fully asleep, the nightmares came almost immediately. I remember being afraid to close my eyes because I knew another one was waiting. But I was too sick and exhausted to stay awake. Sooner or later, I would drift off again. Most of those dreams faded after I recovered. I know there were several of them, and I know they frightened me, but I can no longer remember the details. There was one nightmare, however, that never truly left me. Even after more than 30 years, I can still see parts of it clearly. In the dream, I was on a ship. I do not remember where the ship had come from or where it was going. There were no familiar faces around me. I do not remember seeing a captain, sailors, or passengers. It felt as if I were alone on a large wooden vessel in the middle of an endless ocean. The sky above me was dark and heavy. I could not tell whether it was night or whether a storm was approaching. Thick clouds covered everything, and the sea looked almost black. The ship rose and fell with the waves. Every movement made the wood creak beneath my feet. Cold wind moved across the deck, carrying the smell of salt and deep water. I remember holding on to part of the ship because the waves kept throwing me from side to side. There was no land anywhere, no lights, no other ships, only the ocean stretching in every direction. At first, I was not afraid of anything specific. I was simply aware that I was alone and far from safety. Then, the water beside the ship began to move. It did not look like normal waves. Something enormous was rising from below. The sea swelled upward as if a mountain were pushing through it. Water poured away from a dark shape that was too large for me to understand. Then a tentacle came out of the ocean. It struck the side of the ship with enough force to shake the entire deck. The wood cracked. I fell to my knees. Another tentacle rose from the water on the opposite side. Then another. A giant squid was attacking the ship. In the dream, I never saw the entire creature clearly. I saw pieces of it between the waves. A massive head beneath the surface, a dark eye appearing for a moment before disappearing under the water. Long tentacles twisting around the ship like living ropes. The creature was so large that the vessel seemed like a toy in its grasp. Its tentacles wrapped around the sides, tightening until the wood began to break. Parts of the railing snapped and fell into the sea. The ship leaned dangerously. I tried to move away from the edge, but the wet deck made it difficult to stand. The squid continued pulling. The entire ship seemed to turn beneath me. I could hear the sound of breaking wood, rushing water, and something deep below the surface. It may have been the creature moving, or it may have been the ship collapsing. I crawled across the deck, trying to reach somewhere safe. There was nowhere to go. Then one of the tentacles came over the side. It moved quickly across the deck. I tried to crawl away, but it reached me. The tentacle wrapped around my right ankle. The feeling was cold and wet. It tightened instantly. I screamed and grabbed at the deck, but the creature began pulling me backward. My hands slid across the wet wood. I tried to hold on to anything I could reach. My fingers found the edge of a broken board, and I held it as tightly as possible. The tentacle pulled harder. My body stretched across the deck. My right leg felt as if it were being torn from me. I kicked with my free foot and tried to strike the tentacle, but it did not loosen. I remember looking back toward the water. The tentacle disappeared over the side of the ship and into the dark sea. Somewhere beneath those waves, the rest of the creature was waiting. It was pulling me toward the edge. I knew that if it dragged me into the water, I would not escape. I would be pulled down into the black ocean, far below the surface, where no one would ever find me. I began trying to drag myself forward. My hands scratched against the boards. My arms burned from the effort. Every time I managed to move a small distance, the squid pulled me backward again. It was completely useless. I was a child fighting against something large enough to destroy an entire ship. Still, I refused to let go. The tentacle tightened around my ankle. I felt myself being pulled closer to the side. The broken edge of the ship was only a short distance behind me. Water washed across the deck with every wave. I screamed for help, but there was no one there. The ship continued breaking apart. Another tentacle struck nearby. The wood beneath me shifted, and my hands lost their grip. The squid pulled again. I slid backward toward the ocean. I dug my fingers into the floor, desperately trying to stop myself. My nails hurt, and my hands felt raw, but nothing helped. The edge came closer. I could see the dark water below. I could see pieces of the ship floating on the surface. The tentacle around my ankle dragged me another few feet. I was almost over the side. That was when I woke up screaming. I was not simply making a frightened sound or calling out in my sleep. I was screaming as hard as I could. My throat hurt from it. For several seconds, I did not know where I was. The ocean, the ship, and the squid still felt real. I expected to feel water beneath me. I expected to see the broken deck and the dark waves. Instead, I was inside my house. But I was not in my bed. I was not even in my bedroom. Somehow, while still asleep, I had dragged myself out of my room. I had crossed the hallway. I had reached the staircase. When I woke, I was halfway up the stairs. I was lying in a strange position, still pulling myself forward as though I were trying to escape from something behind me. For a moment, I could not understand how I had gotten there. Then I felt pressure around my right ankle. My blanket had wrapped itself tightly around my leg. It was twisted around the exact ankle the squid had grabbed in the dream. The rest of the blanket stretched behind me, trailing down the hallway toward my bedroom. In my fevered sleep, the blanket had probably become tangled around my ankle. My brain had turned that feeling into the tentacle. But the dream had also made me physically try to escape. I had not simply moved around in bed. I had crawled out of the room. I had dragged the blanket with me. I had crossed the hallway and started climbing the staircase while still dreaming that I was pulling myself away from the squid. That realization frightened me almost as much as the nightmare itself. The dream had controlled my body. I had moved through the house without knowing where I was or what I was doing. I do not remember leaving the bed. I do not remember reaching the door. I do not remember crossing the hallway. I only remember the ship, the tentacle, and the desperate effort to pull myself free. My family came to see why I was screaming. They found me on the stairs with the blanket still wrapped around my ankle. I was sweating from the fever and completely terrified. I tried to explain what had happened, but I was still confused. I told them about the squid and how it had been pulling me into the sea. They helped untangle the blanket and took me back to bed. I did not want to sleep again. I was afraid that if I closed my eyes, I would return to the ship. I also worried that I might get up and move around again. The next time, I might fall down the stairs or leave the house. My family stayed close and tried to calm me. Eventually, the fever went down. The influenza passed. My strength returned, and the other nightmares stopped. Life went back to normal. The squid did not. For a long time after I recovered, I thought about that dream whenever I saw the ocean in a movie or picture. Even a harmless image of a squid or octopus could bring back the feeling of the tentacle around my ankle. I knew it had only been a fever dream. I knew the blanket had created the pressure on my leg. I knew there had been no ship and no giant creature. None of that knowledge stopped the memory from frightening me. The nightmare returned over the years. Sometimes it was almost exactly the same. I would be on the ship again, surrounded by dark water, and the squid would rise from below. Other times, the details changed. I might be swimming instead of sailing. I might be standing on a dock while something moved under the water. I might be inside a different kind of boat. But the creature was always there. The tentacle always found me. It usually grabbed my right ankle. Every time it happened, I felt the same helplessness I had experienced as a child. The squid was too large to fight. The water was too deep. There was nowhere to run. I would wake suddenly with my heart racing, sometimes checking my ankle to make sure nothing was wrapped around it. Even as an adult, the dream could leave me afraid to go back to sleep. People often laugh when they hear about a fear of a giant squid. It sounds like something from an adventure story. There are no giant squids hiding in bedrooms or hallways. I do not live on a ship. I am not likely to be dragged beneath the sea by a tentacle. Logically, there is no reason for the dream to continue affecting me. But nightmares do not always care about logic. The squid became connected to something deeper than the animal itself. It became the feeling of being trapped. It became the fear of losing control of my body. It became the memory of waking in a completely different part of the house without knowing how I had gotten there. That may be why it never disappeared. More than 30 years have passed since the influenza. I have grown older, lived through many real problems, and experienced things that should be more frightening than a childhood dream. Still, the squid returns. Sometimes years pass without a nightmare about it. Then, without warning, I find myself back on the ship. The dark water rises. The wood begins to break. Something wraps around my ankle. The old fear returns as strongly as ever. A few years ago, I had surgery. The procedure required general anesthesia. Before the surgery, I was nervous, but not because of the squid. I was worried about the normal things people worry about before an operation. I wondered how much pain I would feel afterward, how long recovery would take, and whether everything would go well. The medical staff prepared me and explained what would happen. I remember lying down and feeling the medication begin to work. The room seemed to move farther away. Voices became quiet. Then, there was nothing. When I woke, the surgery was over. I was confused and tired, which is common after anesthesia. I had little memory of the first minutes of waking up. Later, when I looked at my medical papers, I found something unexpected written in the notes. Apparently, while coming out of the anesthesia, I had been mumbling about a giant squid. The staff had also written that I was extremely uncooperative. It was not because I was angry with them. According to the notes, I was afraid that making noise or moving too much would attract the squid's attention. I had no clear memory of saying those things. I did not remember seeing the creature during the surgery. I did not remember believing it was nearby. But somewhere inside my unconscious mind, the squid had returned. While I was barely awake and unable to think clearly, I was still afraid of it. I had carried that childhood nightmare with me for decades, and it had appeared again when anesthesia lowered the barriers in my mind. The medical staff probably had no idea what I meant. To them, I was a confused patient mumbling strange things after surgery. They could not have known about the fever, the ship, the staircase, or the blanket wrapped around my right ankle. They could not have known that the squid had been following me through my dreams since I was 10 or 11 years old. Reading those notes was both funny and disturbing. Part of me laughed at the idea of trying to stay quiet in a recovery room because I did not want a giant squid to notice me. Another part of me felt deeply uncomfortable. The fear was still inside me. Even when I was not fully conscious, my mind returned to the same creature. I sometimes wonder whether the nightmare would have been forgotten if I had simply woken in my bed. Maybe the physical experience is what made it permanent. The blanket really was around my ankle. I really had dragged myself through the house. I really had reached the stairs. The dream and reality had become mixed together in a way that made the memory difficult to separate. My brain had taken a normal physical sensation and created a complete world around it. The blanket became a tentacle. The floor became the deck of a ship. The hallway became part of my desperate escape. The staircase became somewhere I had to climb before the creature pulled me back. While dreaming, all of it made perfect sense. That is one of the things I find most frightening about the mind. It can take small pieces of reality and build something terrifying from them. A twisted blanket was enough to create a monster. The pressure around my ankle became proof that the squid had me. My movements in the house became part of the dream. I do not know whether I was trying to reach my family or simply trying to get away from the imagined sea. Maybe some part of my sleeping mind knew the stairs led toward safety. Maybe I was moving randomly. I will never know. What I do know is that I woke far from my bed, screaming and fighting against something that did not exist. Even now, I dislike having blankets wrapped tightly around my legs. If fabric becomes tangled around my right ankle during the night, I often wake and pull it away. Sometimes the movement is automatic. I may not even be thinking about the squid, but my body remembers the feeling. I also feel uncomfortable around certain images of deep water. The open ocean has always seemed frightening to me, especially when the water is dark and you cannot see what is below the surface. A lake or swimming pool usually does not bother me in the same way. It is the idea of endless depth that brings the dream back. There could be anything beneath you. You would not see it until it reached the surface. You would not know a tentacle was coming until it wrapped around your leg. I understand that giant squids are real animals, but they are not hunting people near the surface of the sea. The creature from my dream was not realistic. It was more like a monster created by a sick child's imagination. That does not make it less powerful. In dreams, fear does not need to be realistic. It only needs to feel real. I have sometimes tried to imagine a different ending to the nightmare. Maybe I cut the tentacle. Maybe someone arrives and helps me. Maybe the squid releases me. Maybe I reach a lifeboat and escape. These imagined endings have never replaced the original one. The dream always returns to the moment when I am being pulled backward. I never defeat the creature. I never reach safety. I wake before I am dragged into the water. Perhaps that is why the dream continues. It never finished. The fear remained suspended at its worst point. The squid was still pulling. The ocean was still waiting. My hands were still slipping. Then I woke on the stairs. I have learned to live with it. The nightmares do not happen every night, and they do not control my daily life. Most of the time I can talk about the experience calmly. Sometimes I even find humor in it. There is something almost ridiculous about a childhood fever dream appearing in medical notes decades later. But whenever the squid returns, the fear is not funny. In the dream, I am not an adult remembering a childhood illness. I am that sick child again. I am alone on the ship. The sky is dark. The sea is moving. The tentacle is around my right ankle. I am pulling myself forward with all my strength, but the creature is stronger. Then I wake and check where I am. I look at the room. I feel the bed beneath me. I make sure the blanket is not wrapped around my leg. Only then can I relax. People may consider it a mild experience because no real animal attacked me. I was not actually on a ship. I was not injured. But fear does not always need a real event to leave a lasting mark. Sometimes a dream is enough. Sometimes the mind creates something so powerful that the body remembers it for the rest of your life. More than 30 years have passed. The fever is gone. The influenza is only a distant memory. The child who dragged himself through the hallway has grown up. But somewhere beneath the surface of my mind, the giant squid is still waiting. And whenever I am sick, exhausted, or placed under anesthesia, I wonder if it will find me again. I used to live with my family in a large residential apartment block. It was the kind of building where many families lived close together, with long shared hallways, heavy entrance doors, and a basement beneath the entire building. Every apartment had its own small storage space down there, usually called a basement cell. People kept old furniture, tools, boxes, food supplies, coal, and anything else they did not want inside their homes. Our apartment had a coal furnace, so we stored buckets and piles of coal in our basement cell. Whenever the furnace needed more fuel, someone had to go downstairs, fill a bucket, and carry it back up. The basement was never a pleasant place. Even during the day, it was dark, cold, and damp. The walls were made of rough concrete, and the narrow corridors smelled of dust, old wood, rust, wet stone, and coal. The lights were weak and spaced far apart, so there were always sections where the darkness seemed thicker. Most of the basement was arranged around a main corridor. From there, smaller passages led to the storage cells belonging to each apartment. Some areas were wide enough for two people to pass each other, but others were extremely narrow. Our storage cell was in one of the worst sections. To reach it, you had to leave the main corridor and enter a tight, dark side passage. Only two basement cells were located there, ours and the one belonging to another neighbor. The light switch was inside that passage. This meant you could not stand safely in the brighter main corridor and turn on the light before entering. You had to walk several steps into complete darkness, reach around near the wall, find the switch, and then turn it on. I had done it many times. Usually, I would enter slowly with one hand stretched in front of me. My other hand would search along the wall until my fingers found the switch. Once the light came on, I would unlock our basement cell, fill the bucket with coal, and leave as quickly as possible. Even before anything happened, I did not like going down there. The building made strange noises. Pipes ran along the ceiling and sometimes knocked or hissed. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. A door would move because of a draft, and the sound would travel through the corridors. Because the basement was shared by so many people, you could never be completely certain that you were alone. Sometimes you heard footsteps and did not know which direction they were coming from. Sometimes you entered a corridor and saw the weak light beneath a storage door, meaning someone was already inside. Still, nothing truly frightening had ever happened to me there. It was only an unpleasant place where I had to collect coal. One morning, my mother asked me to go down to the basement and bring up a bucket. I had just woken up. I was still tired, slow, and not fully aware of what was happening around me. My hair was probably a mess, and I was still wearing whatever clothes I had slept in. My mother needed coal for the furnace, so she asked if I could get it. I agreed, but I did not leave immediately. I took some time to prepare myself. Maybe I went to the bathroom first. Maybe I washed my face or changed my clothes. I may have sat down for a few minutes, trying to wake up. At the time, the delay meant nothing. I was simply being lazy because I had just gotten out of bed. My mother probably expected me to go immediately, but I kept moving slowly. Eventually, I got ready. I found the empty coal bucket and prepared to leave the apartment. I was only moments away from opening the door and heading downstairs. Then, someone knocked. It was one of our neighbors. They seemed frightened and shocked. They told us that there was a dead body in the basement. A man had hanged himself from a handle. For a few seconds, I did not fully understand what they were saying. A dead body was not something that belonged in the same sentence as our basement. The basement was where we kept coal, old tools, and boxes. It was where neighbors stored things they did not use. It was not where people died. The neighbor repeated what had happened. Someone had gone downstairs and found the man hanging there. When I understood exactly where the body was, I felt sick. It was in the narrow side passage near our basement cell. The same place I had been about to enter. The same dark space where I would normally walk several steps before turning on the light. If I had obeyed my mother immediately, I might have been the person who found him. That thought has stayed with me ever since. I imagine what would have happened if I had not taken my time that morning. I would have picked up the bucket and left the apartment while I was still half asleep. I would have walked down the stairs toward the basement. The air would have become colder with every step. I would have opened the heavy basement door and entered the main corridor. Everything would have seemed normal. The weak lights would have been glowing overhead. Pipes would have been running along the ceiling. The familiar smell of coal and damp concrete would have filled the air. I would have walked toward our storage area without expecting anything unusual. Then I would have reached the narrow passage. It would have been completely dark. Because I had gone there so many times before, I probably would not have hesitated. I would have stepped inside. The man's body was not in the main corridor, where I might have seen it from a distance. It was inside the tight space. There would have been almost no room between me and him. I would have entered without knowing that a dead person was hanging only a few feet away. I would have reached for the light switch. Maybe my hand would have brushed against his clothing. Maybe the movement of air from my body would have caused him to turn slightly. Maybe I would have heard the rope or the handle creak. Then I would have switched on the light. The entire scene would have appeared in front of me at once. There would have been no time to prepare. No warning. 1 second, I would have been standing in darkness. The next, I would have been face to face with a dead man. Even now, I cannot imagine how terrifying that would have been. I am certain I would have screamed. I might have dropped the bucket. I might have fallen backward or hurt myself trying to escape the narrow passage. Because the space was so tight, I would have had to turn around or back out while the body was hanging close beside me. I honestly believe I would have lost control of myself completely. The neighbor who actually found him must have experienced something similar. I never asked for every detail because I did not want to make them describe it. It was already clear that discovering the body had been deeply traumatic. Finding a dead person anywhere would be horrible. Finding one in a dark basement would be worse. Finding one in a narrow space where you had to walk in before turning on the light was something I could hardly understand. That morning, I kept thinking about how close I had come to being the one who found him. Only a few minutes had separated me from that experience. If I had gotten out of bed faster, I would have seen him. If I had not stopped to wash my face or change clothes, I would have seen him. If my mother had asked me slightly earlier, I might have seen him. My laziness had protected me. That felt strange. Usually, adults tell children to do things immediately. Do not wait. Do not complain. Do not waste time. That day, delaying the task saved me from a memory that probably would have followed me for the rest of my life. Of course, even without seeing the body, the incident changed the basement forever. Later, we learned who the man was. He was the boyfriend of one of our neighbors. Apparently, the two of them had been having serious problems in their relationship. I do not know every detail, and I do not think anyone outside the relationship knew the whole story. For whatever reason, he went into the basement and took his own life. He chose the narrow passage near the storage cells. I sometimes wondered why he went there. Maybe he knew the basement well. Maybe he wanted privacy. Maybe he knew his girlfriend or someone connected to her would eventually find him. Maybe he simply chose the first hidden place available. There was no answer that made it less disturbing. The basement was shared by families. Children went down there. Older people went down there. Anyone could have found him. He might have known that. Perhaps he did not care anymore. The authorities came to the building to remove the body. News spread quickly among the residents. People gathered near the windows and hallways, speaking quietly. Everyone knew something terrible had happened, but no one seemed to know what to say. When the body was finally carried out of the apartment block, another strange thing happened. The man's girlfriend received a text message from his phone. The message said, "Now you are free." At first, it sounded like something supernatural. The man was already dead. His body was being taken from the building. Then, his girlfriend received a message from him. For a short time, people must have wondered if the text had come from beyond the grave. Even though the situation was tragic, the timing made it frightening. Imagine watching someone's body being brought outside, then hearing your phone alert you to a new message. You look at the screen. The name of the dead person appears. The words say, "Now you are free." It sounds like the final line of a ghost story. There was, however, a simple explanation. The basement had poor mobile reception. The thick walls and underground location blocked the signal. The man had written and sent the message before he died, but his phone had been unable to connect to the mobile network. The text remained unsent while his body was in the basement. When the authorities carried him outside into the open air, the phone finally found a signal. The message was sent automatically. There was nothing paranormal about it. The timing only made it appear that way. Still, knowing the explanation does not remove the horror of the moment. The message had been planned. Before killing himself, the man had written those words to his girlfriend, "Now you are free." Those words suggested that he wanted her to understand his death as part of their relationship. Maybe he believed he was releasing her. Maybe he wanted to blame her. Maybe he wanted his final act to remain in her mind forever. I do not know what he intended, but receiving that message must have been devastating. The fact that it arrived after his death probably made it even worse. It was as though he had arranged one final contact from outside the building. The phone had remained silent in the basement, waiting. Then, the moment his body reached the street, the message appeared. After that day, I could not look at the basement in the same way. I still had to go there. Our furnace still needed coal. The incident did not change the practical reality of our lives. Someone had to take the bucket downstairs, enter the narrow passage, unlock the storage cell, and bring fuel back up. The first time I returned, I was extremely nervous. I stood at the basement entrance for several seconds before opening the door. The familiar smell came out immediately. Cold air, damp walls, coal dust. Nothing looked different, but I knew someone had died there. Every sound seemed louder. The pipes knocked overhead. My footsteps echoed through the corridor. I kept looking behind me. When I reached the entrance to the narrow passage, I stopped. Before the incident, I would have walked directly into the darkness and searched for the switch. I could not do that anymore. I stood outside the passage and tried to look into it. The darkness was too thick. I could not see the storage doors or the wall at the end. I knew there was nothing there. The body had been removed. The area had been cleared. Still, my mind created the shape of a hanging man inside the darkness. I imagined his feet above the floor. I imagined his head turned slightly to one side. I imagined the rope moving. I did not want to enter. Eventually, I forced myself forward. I moved slowly, with one hand against the wall. Every step felt wrong. I expected something to touch me. When my fingers found the light switch, I hesitated before pressing it. That moment was the worst. The basement was still dark, and my mind had time to imagine what the light might reveal. Then I turned it on. The passage was empty. Only the two storage doors stood there. No body. No movement. Nothing unusual. I quickly unlocked our cell, filled the bucket, and left. After that, I developed a habit that I still have. Whenever I enter a similar dark space, I check it before turning on the light. That may sound impossible because darkness makes it difficult to see anything, but I still try. I stand at the edge and search for shapes. I use light from the hallway or my phone if I have one. I listen. I make sure nothing appears to be hanging in front of me. Only then do I reach for the switch. I know it is not logical. If something were truly hidden in the darkness, looking from outside might not help. But the habit gives me a small sense of control. I do not want to step blindly into a dark space and have the truth appear only when the light turns on. That is what frightens me. Not simply seeing something terrible. It is the sudden change from not knowing to knowing. Darkness allows the mind to hope the space is empty. Light removes that hope instantly. The neighbor who found the man had no warning. They probably entered expecting an ordinary task. Maybe they were going for coal, tools, or something stored in their cell. They probably reached for the switch without fear. Then the light came on. In 1 second, An ordinary basement became the place where they discovered a dead man. I often think about them. I wonder if they also became afraid of basements. I wonder if they dreamed about the body. I wonder if the image appeared whenever they closed their eyes. They may have avoided that passage for years. Maybe they moved away. Maybe they learned to live with it. People often speak about death as if the tragedy belongs only to the person who dies and the family left behind. But a violent or shocking death can affect strangers too. The person who finds the body may carry that image forever. The police and medical workers may remember the scene. The neighbors may become afraid of familiar places. Children may overhear conversations and imagine things worse than the truth. One person's final decision can enter the lives of many people. I was lucky enough not to see him. Still, the knowledge that he had been there was enough to change the way I moved through the basement. For months, I avoided looking toward the handle where he had been found. Even when the area was empty, I imagined a rope attached to it. Sometimes the weak light made shadows on the walls, and I would think I saw a shape moving. I knew it was only my mind. Fear creates images easily when you know something terrible happened in a place. Before the suicide, the narrow passage had simply been uncomfortable. Afterward, it felt occupied. Not by a ghost exactly. I never saw anything supernatural. It was occupied by memory. The walls held the knowledge of what had happened. The handle was no longer just a handle. The place where the body had hung remained clearly marked in my mind, even though there was no physical sign. I could not enter without thinking about him. I also thought about his girlfriend. She had to live in the same building where her boyfriend died. She had to pass the basement door. She had to know he chose a place beneath her home. Then she received his final message. Now you are free. Maybe she felt guilty. Maybe she felt angry. Maybe she truly did feel free and then hated herself for it. I hope people supported her. A message like that can place a terrible weight on someone. It can sound like an accusation, even if it was meant as a goodbye. The phone signal explained how the text arrived after his death, but it did not explain the emotions behind it. That part remained between them. The incident taught me how quickly an ordinary day can become something you never forget. That morning, my mother only wanted coal for the furnace. I had just woken up. I was annoyed that I had to get dressed and go downstairs. There was nothing special about the task. If the neighbor had arrived a few minutes later, my life might have been different. I might have carried the image of that man through childhood and adulthood. I might have screamed every time I entered a basement. I might have refused to go near the storage cell again. Instead, I was spared the sight by a small delay. I often wondered whether the person who found him wished they had also waited. Maybe they had been asked to go downstairs by someone else. Maybe they had simply needed something from storage. There is no way to prepare for such a discovery. You do not wake up expecting to find death in a shared basement. You walk in thinking about a bucket, a box, or a tool. Then your life splits into two parts. The time before you turned on the light and the time after. Years have passed, but I still remember the moment our neighbor knocked on the apartment door. I remember standing there with the coal bucket, almost ready to leave. I remember hearing the words dead body and basement. I remember realizing exactly where the man had been found. The bucket suddenly felt heavy in my hand. I looked toward the apartment door and imagined myself already downstairs. It felt as though I had escaped something without even knowing I was in danger. People sometimes think fear only comes from what happens to us. Sometimes it comes from what almost happened. I never saw the body. I never entered the passage while he was hanging there. I never reached for the switch. But I have imagined it so many times that the scene almost feels like a memory. In my mind, I walk into the darkness. I search for the switch. My fingers find it. The light comes on, and he is there. That imagined moment is enough. Even now, when I enter a dark basement, I do not simply reach for the light. I stop. I look into the darkness first. I listen for movement. I check the space as carefully as I can. Only then do I press the switch. It probably would not protect me from anything, but I still do it, because once a dead man was hanging in the darkness, only a few steps from our coal cell. And if I had gotten out of bed a little faster that morning, I would have been the one who turned on the light. 10. I was kidnapped while serving as a missionary in Guatemala. Even now, saying that feels strange. It sounds like something that happened to someone else, something from a news report or a crime documentary. But it happened to me, and I still remember the fear of that day more clearly than I would like. At the time, I had only been in Guatemala for about 3 months. Everything still felt new to me. I was learning the area, getting used to the culture, trying to understand the language better, and adjusting to the daily life of missionary work. There were things that felt unfamiliar, but I had not arrived expecting to face something like this. We knew there were risks. We had heard stories about crime, robbery, and people being taken for ransom. We also knew that missionaries had been kidnapped before. Those stories were always somewhere in the back of my mind, but they still felt distant. You hear about terrible things happening to other people, and part of you believes that the same thing will never happen to you. That belief disappeared for me in a matter of seconds. One morning, a group of about 12 of us missionaries traveled to the capital. I do not remember every detail of why we went there, but it was a normal trip connected to our work and responsibilities. There were enough of us that we hired a van to take us. The plan was simple. We would go to the capital, complete what we needed to do, and then return to the coast where we were living. Nothing about the morning made me think the day would become one of the worst experiences of my life. We were tired by the time we began the journey back. Some people talked quietly. Others looked out the windows or tried to rest. The road stretched ahead of us, and the van moved steadily away from the capital. I remember feeling safe because I was not traveling alone. There were about 12 missionaries together, along with the driver. We were in a vehicle we had hired, and we were all heading back to a place we knew. There is comfort in numbers. You believe that being part of a large group gives you protection. You believe that danger is less likely to choose a van filled with people. That was not true. At some point during the drive, a truck came up beside us. At first, it may have looked like normal traffic. Vehicles pass each other all the time, and there was no immediate reason to think the truck was a threat. Then, we heard the shots. The men in the truck started firing their guns. They were not shooting directly at us at first. They seemed to be firing warning shots, but in that moment, there was no way to know where the next bullet would go. The sound was violent and sudden. Gunfire is nothing like it sounds in movies. It is sharper, louder, and more frightening when it is real. There is no background music and no time to understand what is happening. Your body reacts before your mind does. People shouted. Some of us ducked instinctively. The driver tried to keep control of the van. The truck remained beside us, forcing us toward the edge of the road. The men wanted us to stop. They kept firing and pushing closer until our driver had no choice. They ran us off the road. Everything happened so quickly that I barely had time to think. One moment, we were traveling home. The next, armed men were surrounding us. Before we fully understood what was happening, they were inside the van. They entered with guns pointed at us. There was no chance to fight back. There were many of us, but that did not matter. A group of unarmed people has very little power when several men are holding guns. They shouted orders. They told us to put our heads down. We obeyed immediately. I lowered my face and tried not to look at them. I could see parts of the floor and the legs of the people around me, but I did not dare lift my head. The men made it clear that they were in control. One of them held a gun to the driver's head. They told him where to go. The van began moving again, but now it was no longer taking us home. We had no idea where we were being taken. That was when the fear became almost impossible to control. I knew we were being kidnapped. There was no other explanation. Armed men had forced us off the road, taken control of our van, and were directing the driver at gunpoint. I thought about the stories we had heard. Missionaries had been kidnapped for ransom before. Sometimes they were held for money. Sometimes they were beaten. Sometimes they disappeared. I did not know which kind of situation we were in. I did not know whether the men knew who we were. I did not know whether they had planned to target missionaries or had simply chosen our van. I did not know whether they expected money from our families, our church, or our organization. I did not know whether they planned to leave any of us alive. The van continued moving. We kept our heads down. No one spoke unless the kidnappers demanded an answer. The atmosphere inside the vehicle was filled with fear. I could hear breathing around me. Some people were trying not to cry. Others were completely silent. I do not know how long we drove because time stopped feeling normal. It may have been minutes or much longer. When you believe you may die, every second becomes heavy. I tried to understand what was happening from the sounds. I listened to the road beneath the tires. I listened for turns. I tried to notice whether we were on a paved road or somewhere rougher. But fear made it difficult to focus. My mind kept returning to the gun. I knew there was a weapon pressed near the driver's head. One wrong movement could cause someone to fire. The driver was being forced to take us somewhere against his will. He had to control the van while terrified men shouted at him and held a gun close to him. I felt sorry for him, but I was also afraid he might panic. If he lost control, the van could crash. If he tried to resist, they might shoot him. If he misunderstood their directions, they might become angry. We were completely dependent on a frightened man who was being threatened with death. At some point, the kidnappers began taking our belongings. They demanded money, wallets, watches, and anything else they considered valuable. We gave them everything. There was no reason to argue. Money had no value compared to staying alive. I handed over what I had. I remember feeling strange as they searched us and took our things. It was humiliating, but humiliation seemed unimportant. I only wanted to survive. I kept thinking that if we cooperated, maybe they would let us go. Then another thought would come. Maybe cooperation would not matter. Maybe they had already decided what they would do with us. The kidnappers did not want us to see where we were going. They blindfolded us. Once my eyes were covered, the fear became worse. Before that, I could at least see the floor and small movements around me. After the blindfold, there was nothing. Only darkness. I could not see the guns. I could not see the men. I could not see the people beside me. I could not tell whether someone was raising a weapon or preparing to strike. I had to depend completely on sound. Every movement became threatening. A shoe shifting against the floor sounded important. A change in someone's breathing made me wonder if they were hurt. A whisper from one of the kidnappers made me imagine the worst. I felt hands on me as they restrained us. We were tied or held in a way that made it difficult to move. The feeling of being physically unable to protect myself was terrifying. Even if I had seen an opportunity to run, I could not have taken it. Even if someone beside me needed help, I might not have been able to reach them. I was trapped inside my own body, blind and restrained, surrounded by armed strangers. That was the moment I truly believed I might die. I had never faced death so directly before. People often say that life flashes before your eyes, but that was not exactly what happened to me. My thoughts moved in every direction. I thought about my family. I thought about whether they would ever know what happened. I wondered if they would receive a phone call demanding money. I wondered if they would hear that I had disappeared in Guatemala. I imagined the pain and fear they would experience. I thought about the things I had not said. I thought about the people I loved. I thought about how recently I had arrived in the country and how quickly everything could end. I had come to serve as a missionary. I had expected challenges, but I had not expected to be sitting blindfolded in a stolen journey while men with guns decided whether I lived or died. I prayed. I do not remember every word. Some prayers were clear, others were only thoughts. I asked God to protect us. I asked that none of us be killed. I asked for strength. I asked for a way out. At the same time, I tried to prepare myself for the possibility that no help was coming. That was one of the hardest parts. Hope and fear existed together. Part of me believed we might survive. Another part of me expected to hear a gunshot at any moment. The men continued speaking to each other. I could not understand everything they said. Sometimes their voices sounded calm. Other times, they sounded angry or impatient. I tried to tell from their tone what they planned to do. It was impossible. They had complete control, and we knew nothing. Eventually, the van left the main road. The ride became rougher. We were being taken somewhere isolated. That realization created a new wave of fear. Criminals do not usually take kidnapped people into remote areas for a good reason. I imagined a place where no one would hear us. I imagined being lined up outside the van. I imagined gunshots in a field. I imagined our bodies being left where no one would find them. The vehicle continued over uneven ground. Then it stopped. The engine became quiet. For a moment, no one moved. I could hear doors opening. The kidnappers began ordering us out. Being blindfolded made every step difficult. I did not know how far the ground was below me. I did not know what was nearby. Hands pushed or guided us out of the van. The air outside felt different. I could hear plants moving in the wind. The ground beneath my feet was rough. We were somewhere away from the road. The men led us into a sugarcane field. At the time, I could not see it clearly because of the blindfold, but I could feel the tall plants around us. The leaves brushed against my clothes and skin. The field seemed endless. Sugarcane grows high and close together, making it difficult to see through or move quickly. It was the perfect place to hide people. I remember thinking that this might be where they killed us. We were restrained, blindfolded, and surrounded by tall plants. There were no witnesses, no traffic, no easy way to call for help. The kidnappers gave more orders. I tried to follow every instruction exactly. I did not want to give them any reason to become violent. Then they left us. At first, we did not know they were gone. We heard movement and voices, then the sound of the vehicle starting. The engine grew louder. The van moved away. We listened as the sound became weaker. Finally, there was silence. None of us moved immediately. We were afraid it might be a trick. The kidnappers could have been waiting nearby to see if we tried to escape. They might have returned if we lifted our heads too soon. We stayed still and listened. The sugarcane moved around us. Someone began whispering. Another person asked whether the men were gone. Slowly, we began helping one another. Some of us managed to loosen our restraints. Those who could move worked to free the others. We removed the blindfolds carefully. Light returned. The first thing I saw was the sugarcane. Tall green plants surrounded us in every direction. We looked at one another, checking for injuries. We were shaken, dirty, and terrified. But we were alive. That fact felt almost impossible. The men had robbed us. They had threatened us. They had blindfolded and restrained us, but they had not killed us. For the first time since the truck appeared, I felt a small amount of hope. Then we realized we still had to get out. We were in an unfamiliar field with no clear idea where we were. The kidnappers had taken our belongings, and we did not know how far we were from a road or town. The sugar cane made it difficult to see anything beyond a few feet. We had to stay together. No one wanted to become separated after what we had just survived. We moved carefully through the field, looking for a path. Every sound made us nervous. If we heard an engine, we did not know whether it meant help or the kidnappers returning. If something moved among the plants, we turned quickly. Our bodies were free, but our minds still felt trapped. Eventually, we found our way toward safety. I do not remember every part of the escape as clearly as the kidnapping itself. Fear has a way of making certain moments sharp and leaving others blurred. I remember the relief of seeing signs of other people. I remember realizing that the men were not coming back. I remember the first moment when I believed we might truly survive. Authorities were contacted. People helped us. We told the story again and again. Each time I repeated it, the events sounded unreal. A truck had attacked us. Men had fired warning shots. They had forced the van off the road. They had entered with guns. They had held a weapon to the driver's head. They had kidnapped 12 missionaries. They had robbed us, blindfolded us, restrained us, and abandoned us in a sugarcane field. It sounded like a nightmare. But the marks on our wrists, the missing belongings, and the fear on everyone's faces were real. Afterward, I had trouble understanding how normal the world continued to look. People walked through streets. Cars moved along the roads. Stores opened. Children played. For everyone else, it was an ordinary day. For us, life had changed. I began thinking differently about every vehicle that approached from behind. If a truck came too close, my body reacted before I could stop it. The sound of a loud engine made me tense. Unexpected popping sounds reminded me of gunfire. I became more aware of roads, exits, and places where someone could force a vehicle to stop. The kidnapping did not end when the men left the field. Part of it remained inside me. For a long time, I replayed the moment the truck came beside us. I wondered if there had been a warning we missed. Maybe the driver noticed something. Maybe someone in the van saw the truck earlier. Maybe we could have turned around. These thoughts were useless, but they came anyway. The truth was that the attack happened quickly. We had little chance to escape. The men were armed and prepared. We were not. I also thought about the driver. He had a gun held to his head while being forced to take us somewhere. He carried the responsibility for all our lives while facing his own death. I do not know how he kept control of the vehicle. His fear must have been as great as ours, perhaps greater. The experience taught me that death can become real without warning. Before that day, I understood death as an idea. I knew everyone eventually dies. I had heard stories of violence. I had prayed for people in danger. But I had never looked at a gun and known that another person could end my life with one movement. That is what I mean when I say I looked death in the face. I did not see a skull or a ghost. I saw armed men who had complete control over us. I saw how little power I had. I understood that my future depended on the decisions of people who did not care about me. That feeling is difficult to forget. People sometimes ask what the worst part was. It is hard to choose one moment. The gunfire was terrifying because it was sudden. Being forced off the road was terrifying because we knew we were trapped. Seeing guns inside the van was terrifying because there was no escape. Being blindfolded was terrifying because we lost our ability to understand what was happening. Being restrained was terrifying because we could not defend ourselves. The sugarcane field was terrifying because it felt like the kind of place people are taken to disappear. But perhaps the worst part was not knowing. We did not know whether they wanted money. We did not know whether they had chosen us because we were missionaries. We did not know whether they planned to contact our families. We did not know whether they would release us. We did not know whether we would live through the next minute. That uncertainty filled every second. We were fortunate. That word almost feels too small. We survived a situation that could have ended in many terrible ways. No one was killed. We were abandoned instead of held for ransom. We were able to free one another and find help. The things they stole could be replaced. Our lives could not. I have often wondered why they let us go. Maybe robbery had been their only goal. Maybe they became nervous because there were so many of us. Maybe they feared the attention that would come from kidnapping a group of missionaries. Maybe abandoning us had been their plan from the beginning. I will never know. The men who attacked us probably continued with their lives. To them, we may have been only another van, another group of victims, another opportunity for money. To me, that day became a permanent part of my life. It changed the way I understood safety. Before, I thought danger announced itself. I thought there would be time to react. I thought being part of a large group would protect me. I thought serious violence happened in clear, dramatic steps. Instead, it happened in seconds. A truck appeared. Gunshots sounded. The road disappeared beneath us. Armed men entered. Our lives were no longer ours. Even now, when I think about Guatemala, I remember many good things. I remember the people, the work, the places, and the reasons I went there. But the kidnapping remains one of the strongest memories. It is the moment when everything familiar was taken away. I was in another country, far from home, surrounded by people I cared about, and none of us could protect the others. All we could do was obey, pray, and hope. I still remember lowering my head in the van. I remember the darkness of the blindfold. I remember the pressure of the restraints. I remember the rough ground beneath my feet in the sugarcane field. I remember listening to the van drive away and wondering whether the silence meant freedom or whether the men were still nearby. Most of all, I remember the moment we realized we were alive. We had been kidnapped. We had been held at gunpoint. We had been robbed, blindfolded, and restrained. We had been left in a field where no one knew to look for us. But we were alive. I had looked death in the face that day. For reasons I may never understand, it looked away first.